Hello there. Tonight, we are going to step away from the noise of the modern world and retreat into the soft, flickering candlelight of 18th century Vienna. We are beginning a long journey, one that follows the life of a woman whose name has become a legend, but whose reality was often lost in the echoing halls of palaces. We are talking about Marie Antoinette. But before she was a queen, before the scandals and the storms of revolution, she was simply Antonia. A child living in a world of rigid order, where every step was measured, and every breath was part of a grand, imperial design. Before we begin our walk through the marble corridors of the Hofburg Palace, I would love it if you'd take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It truly helps these quiet stories find their way to those who need them most. And, as we settle in, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Is it a quiet bedroom, or perhaps a late-night study? Tell me in the comments. I find so much peace in reading where these stories travel to. Now, let the weight of the day fade away. Close your eyes, and let's travel back to November 1755. Vienna is cold, and the winter air is beginning to bite. In the heart of the Austrian Empire, within the thick, protective stone walls of the Hofburg Palace, a child is born. She is the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer scale of this world. This is not a cozy nursery, it is a labyrinth of gold leaf, heavy velvet curtains, and the constant, rhythmic ticking of grandfather clocks. Antonia's first breaths are taken in a room scented with beeswax and expensive perfumes, a place where silence is a form of respect. As a young archduchess, her life is not her own. It belongs to the state. But in these early years, there is a strange, quiet freedom in being the youngest. While her mother, the formidable empress, governs an empire with an iron will, Antonia is left to the care of governesses. Picture a young girl with strawberry blonde hair, running through the gardens of Schönbrunn Palace in the summer. The grass is perfectly manicured, the fountains splash with a steady, repetitive rhythm, drip, drop, drip. The water is cool, and the air smells of blooming roses and damp earth. At Schönbrunn, the boring details of life were the most beautiful. The Empress Maria Theresa believed in a strict but strangely practical upbringing. Antonia and her siblings lived in rooms that were grand, yes, but often drafty. They ate simple meals, light soups, roasted meats, and fresh bread. The ritual of the meal was silent. The clinking of silver against porcelain, the soft rustle of a servant's silk stockings as they moved across the parquet floor. These are the sounds of Antonia's childhood. She was not a studious child. She preferred the physical world, the feeling of a harp string under her fingertip, the way a dance step felt when it was perfectly executed. Her education was, perhaps, neglected. Her tutors were gentle, often too gentle, allowing her to slip away from her Italian lessons or her history books. She lived in a perpetual present, a world where the future was a distant, hazy concept, something that happened to other people, not to the youngest archduchess. But the peace of the garden cannot last forever in the House of Habsburg. Outside the palace walls, the map of Europe is being redrawn with ink and blood. And Maria Theresa, a mother who viewed her children as political capital, began to look at her youngest daughter with a new intensity. The 7 Years' War had ended, leaving France and Austria, longtime enemies, in need of a bond. A marriage. Imagine Antonia at age 12. She is still playing with dolls, still finding secret corners in the palace to hide from her lessons. But in the secret offices of the Empress, her name is being written into treaties. The transition from child to pawn happens slowly, like the turning of a heavy, rusted key in a lock. Suddenly, her education is no longer a choice. It is a race. The Empress realizes that her daughter is not ready for the most sophisticated court in the world. Versailles. And so, the boring work of transformation begins. An actor is brought in from France to teach her how to speak. Not just the language, but the melody of the French tongue. The way the vowels should hang in the air, light and effortless. Antonia sits by a window, watching the gray Vienna sky, repeating the same phrases over and over, until her throat is dry. Bonjour. Monsieur. C'est un plaisir. The words feel heavy in her mouth, foreign and strange. Next comes the hair. The French court is obsessed with appearance. Antonia's hairline is considered too high, her teeth are slightly crooked. A Parisian dentist is summoned. For months, she endures the slow, painful pressure of wires, a primitive form of braces, to force her smile into a perfect, symmetrical line. Every morning, she sits for hours as her hair is pulled, powdered, and arranged. The smell of the hair powder, like dry flour and lavender, fills her lungs. She is being sculpted, carved into the image of a queen, layer by layer. Her mother, the Empress, begins to write her letters. Even though they live in the same palace, the letters are formal. They are instructions on how to behave, how to sit, how to hide her emotions. Antonia must learn the art of the mask. In Vienna, she could laugh loudly. In Versailles, laughter must be controlled. It must be a soft, musical sound, never showing too much teeth, never showing too much joy. As the departure date approaches, the palace is filled with the sound of packing. Large wooden crates are lined with silk. Thousands of dresses, shoes with red heels, lace handkerchiefs, and jewels are tucked away. The boring inventory of a life. Antonia watches the crates being nailed shut. Hammer, hammer, hammer. Each strike of the tool sounds like a door closing on her childhood. She is 14 years old. She has never left her home. She has never known a world that wasn't Austrian. On her final night in Vienna, she sits with her mother. The Empress gives her a small gold watch and a list of rules. Do not be cold, the Empress tells her. But do not be too warm. It is a paradox. A weight that a 14-year-old girl is expected to carry across the border. Antonia looks at the fire in the hearth, the orange flames dancing and turning to gray ash. She is no longer Antonia of Austria. She is becoming Marie Antoinette. The journey to the border is long and rhythmic. The carriage wheels turn over the cobblestones, clack clack, clack clack, for days on end. The landscape changes from the rugged mountains of her home to the rolling, mist-covered fields of the west. She sleeps against the velvet cushions, the vibration of the road huming through her bones. She is traveling toward a crown, but she is also traveling toward an end. As we leave Antonia tonight, sitting in that dark carriage, listening to the horses' hoofs in the rain, let yourself feel the weight of that silence. The quiet before the storm. The world is waiting for her, but for now, she is just a girl, caught between two empires, in the soft, fading light of the old world. Sleep now. Let the rhythm of the carriage carry you into your own dreams. Next time, we will stand with her on the banks of the Rhine, and watch as she leaves everything she knows behind. The carriage continues its slow, rhythmic crawl across the European countryside. The sound of the wooden wheels against the damp earth is a constant, low hum, like the breathing of the world itself. Inside, the young Marie Antoinette sits in a cocoon of silk and velvet, watching the trees pass by like ghosts in the morning mist. We are moving deeper into the year 1770. A time when the fate of nations wasn't decided in parliaments, but in the quiet rustle of parchment and the cold, heavy weight of a marriage treaty. Let the tension in your shoulders melt away. Lean back and listen to the sound of history being written, one slow, deliberate stroke of a pen at a time. The treaty that bound Marie Antoinette to France was not a document of love. It was a bridge of paper built over a century of war. For decades, the lilies of France and the eagles of Austria had torn at one another, but now, the diplomats in Paris and Vienna had decided that a girl's hand in marriage was the only thing strong enough to hold the peace. Imagine the rooms where these decisions were made. High ceilings, the air thick with the smell of old ink, leather-bound books, and the faint, metallic scent of sealing wax being melted over a flame. The boring details of this treaty were meticulously crafted. Every word was a weight, every clause was a chain. It specified her dowry, a staggering sum of 200,000 gold crowns, packed into heavy, iron-bound chests. It specified her jewels, diamonds that caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 pieces, pearls that had been pulled from the depths of the ocean to rest against the skin of a teenager. But most importantly, the treaty specified that she must cease to be Austrian. Antonia, as she was still known in her heart, had to learn that her very identity was now a matter of state. The French court did not want an Austrian archduchess, they wanted a French dauphine. This meant that every habit, every phrase, every tilt of her head had to be re-examined. Think of the exhaustion of such a task. To be 14 years old, and to be told that the way you have breathed and spoken for your entire life is now incorrect. The nights in the transit camps and palaces along the way were long. The candles would burn down to small, flickering stubs, casting long, dancing shadows against the tapestries. Antonia would lie awake, listening to the distant call of an owl, or the steady, repetitive footsteps of the sentries outside her door. Crunch, 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 on the gravel. The world was changing, and she was the silent center of the storm. Her mother's voice stayed with her, not as a comfort, but as a set of instructions. Empress Maria Theresa had written a final, exhaustive list of rules for her daughter. Read no book that is not approved. Speak to no one without permission. Always remember your station. The words must have looped in her mind, a weary, endless cycle that left no room for her own thoughts. She was being hollowed out, prepared to be filled with the expectations of a foreign king. There is a strange peace in the mundane details of such a journey. The way the sunlight hits a silver goblet on a tray. The sound of a brush moving through long, blonde hair. Shh, shh, shh. For an hour every morning. The smell of fresh linen and lavender as the beds were turned down in each new chateau. These are the things Antonia clung to. When the political weight became too much, she focused on the texture of her lace sleeves, or the way the dust danced in a beam of light in the corner of her carriage. But the heart of the treaty was the wedding itself, a wedding by proxy. In the church of the Augustinians in Vienna, Antonia stood at the altar, but the man she was marrying was not there. Her own brother. Archduke Ferdinand stood in for Louis, the grandson of the French king. It was a ghost wedding, a ceremony of shadows. She said her vows to a man she had never met, in a language she was still struggling to master, under the watchful, unblinking eyes of the entire Austrian court. When the ring was placed on her finger, it was cold. A circle of gold that marked the end of her life as a daughter, and the beginning of her life as a symbol. The choir's voices rose to the vaulted ceiling, a wall of sound that felt both holy and terrifying. And then, silence. The heavy, echoing silence of a life changed forever. Now, as the carriage nears the Rhine, the atmosphere changes. The air is thicker, more humid. The river is a gray, swirling ribbon that divides two worlds. On the other side is France. On the other side is Versailles, a palace of mirrors and secrets. The treaty has done its work. The signatures are dry. The seals are set. There is no turning back. The young Dauphine looks out at the water. She sees the boats being prepared to carry her across. They are decorated with blue silk and golden lilies. They look like floating jewels against the dark, muddy water of the river. She feels the tiny, silver watch her mother gave her ticking against her waist. Tick, tick, tick. Every second is a step away from home. The people around her are whispering. Her Austrian ladies-in-waiting are crying softly into their handkerchiefs. They know that soon, they will be sent back. They know that on the other side, Antonia will be alone. But Antonia does not cry. She has learned the first lesson of the treaty. A queen does not show her heart. She remains still. Like a statue. Like a painting. Let yourself feel that stillness now. The carriage has stopped. The horses are huffing, their breath visible in the cool morning air. The door is opened, and the damp, earthy smell of the river fills the cabin. Step out with her, onto the wooden pier. Feel the slight sway of the boards under your feet. The world is holding its breath. Sleep now, as the boat begins to pull away from the Austrian shore. The oars dip into the water with a soft, splashing sound. Dip, swirl, dip. You are safe, tucked away in the quiet of the present, while she drifts toward a destiny she never asked for. The water is calm. The mist is thick. And the journey is only just beginning. The river Rhine, a vast, gray serpent of water, flows with a heavy, ancient rhythm. On its banks, the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and the cold, metallic mist of the morning. We are standing on the edge of two worlds. Behind us lies Austria, the world of Antonia's childhood, the safety of her mother's palace, and the sounds of the German tongue. Ahead, across the swirling water, lies France. This moment, this single day in May 1770, is not just a crossing of water. It is a crossing of souls. The ceremony taking place is one of the most unusual and boring rituals in history. It is called the remise, the formal handover. On a small, neutral island in the middle of the river, a wooden building has been constructed specifically for this hour. It is a structure of temporary walls and silk linings, designed to be a bridge between empires. Imagine the silence here, broken only by the lapping of the water against the wooden pilings, slap, ripple, slap. Antonia steps onto the island. Her heart must be beating like a trapped bird, but her face remains a mask of porcelain. The treaty has brought her here, but the ritual will strip her bare. According to the rigid rules of French etiquette, she cannot take anything Austrian into France. Not a single thread. Not a single memory. Inside the neutral pavilion, there are 2 rooms. One for the Austrian party, and one for the French. Antonia enters the Austrian room first. She is surrounded by her friends, her childhood governesses, the women who have brushed her hair and heard her laughter since she was a baby. The air in the room is heavy with unshed tears. The rustle of their silk gowns sounds like dry leaves in the wind. They are looking at her for the last time. Then comes the most difficult part. The stripping. In a quiet, inner chamber, her Austrian ladies begin to undress her. One by one, the layers of her life are removed. The heavy velvet traveling gown, the lace stays, the silk stockings, even her undergarments. She stands there, shivering slightly in the cool draft of the river air, a 14-year-old girl, completely naked in a room full of strangers and shadows. Everything she brought from Vienna is taken away. Her childhood is folded into neat piles and carried back to the Austrian shore. She is then redressed by her new French household. The touch of the new fabric is different. The French silk is lighter, more delicate, smelling of iris and lavender powder. They slip a French chemise over her head. They tighten a French corset. They slide French slippers onto her feet. Even her hair is rearranged in the French style. She is being rebuilt, piece by piece, until the girl who entered the pavilion no longer exists. Imagine the silence as she walks toward the door that leads to the French side. Her Austrian attendants are forbidden to follow. They stand in the dim light, weeping quietly into their lace handkerchiefs, watching as the youngest archduchess disappears through the doorway. There is no goodbye. The protocol does not allow for it. Just the sound of the door clicking shut. Click. A small sound that echoes like a thunderclap in her heart. On the French side, the atmosphere is electric with expectation. The Comtesse de Noailles is waiting for her. A woman of strict rules and frozen smiles. She looks at Antonia not as a child, but as a project. A representative of the king. Antonia is led to a mirror. She looks at herself, but the reflection is a stranger. The eyes are the same, but the silhouette is entirely French. Now, the procession to the boats begins. The walk is slow and deliberate. The French guards stand at attention, their uniforms a sea of blue and gold. The sun begins to break through the mist, reflecting off the polished silver of their bayonets. Antonia is handed into a magnificent barge. The wood is carved with golden lilies, the seats are cushioned with blue velvet. As the oarsmen begin to row, creak, splash, creak, splash, she looks back at the island. She looks past it to the Austrian shore, where her mother's messengers are already riding away to carry the news to Vienna. The distance grows. The water between her and her past is widening, a cold, gray gap that can never be closed. The sound of the river is hypnotic. The way the water swirls around the oars, creating small, temporary whirlpools that vanish as quickly as they appear. It is a boring transition, a slow movement from one state of being to another. She is no longer an archduchess. She is the Dauphine of France, the future queen. When the barge touches the French soil at Strasbourg, the world explodes into sound. Bells begin to ring in the distant steeples. Bong, bong, bong. Cannons fire in a rhythmic salute, the smoke drifting over the water like heavy, white clouds. The transition is complete. She steps off the boat and onto French earth. The crowds are enormous. Thousands of people have gathered to see the Austrian woman. They see a girl who looks like a doll, pale and perfect. They cheer, but the sound feels hollow to her. It is a wall of noise that she cannot penetrate. She is led to a grand carriage, even larger and more ornate than the one she left in Austria. The interior is lined with white satin. It smells of new leather and expensive perfume. The journey to Versailles begins now. A journey of many days, through towns decorated with flowers and triumphal arches. Every night, she stays in a different chateau. Every morning, she is woken by new faces, people she does not know, people who watch her every move for a sign of weakness. The boring repetition of the road becomes her only companion. The sway of the carriage, the dust on the windows, the constant, low chatter of her new French ladies. They talk of fashion, they talk of the king's health, they talk of the intricate hierarchies of the court. Antonia listens, but her mind is still on the river. Still on the island where she left her clothes and her name. As you listen to the sound of these words, let yourself feel the weight of that carriage. The way it rocks you into a state of quiet contemplation. The world outside is a blur of green fields and gray stone villages, but inside the carriage, time has slowed down. Every mile is a thread being pulled from her old life. Every mile is a new layer of the French dream being wrapped around her. Think of the long evenings at the inns along the way. The flickering of a single candle on a bedside table. The shadows dancing on the ceiling. Antonia lying in a bed that isn't hers, in a country that doesn't yet feel like home, listening to the wind in the trees. The wind sounds the same in France as it did in Austria, and in that small detail, she finds a tiny, secret comfort. We are moving closer to the heart of the kingdom now. Closer to the palace of mirrors, where hundreds of people are waiting to judge her. But for tonight, she is just a traveler. A passenger in the dark, moving through a landscape she has only seen on maps. Let the rhythm of the journey soothe you. The horse's hoofs on the road, clop clop, clop clop, a steady heartbeat of a sound. The road is long, and the night is deep. The river Rhine is far behind her now, but its cold mist still clings to her memories. Sleep now, as the carriage moves through the quiet French countryside. The stars are out, cold and bright, watching over the girl who gave up everything to become a queen. The world is vast, and the silence is beautiful. Rest and dream of the long, winding road to Versailles. The carriage has finally reached the end of its long, dusty journey. The rhythmic clattering of hoofs on the open road has changed, replaced by the sharp, echoing ring of iron shoes on the grand cobblestones of Versailles. Imagine the sound, clack, 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 echoing off the immense stone wings of the palace. It is the sound of arrival, but also the sound of a cage door gently swinging shut. As the golden gates of the courtyard come into view, the sheer scale of the world Antonia is about to enter begins to weigh upon her. This is no longer the cozy, familiar grandeur of Vienna. This is Versailles. A city of stone and mirrors, built to overwhelm the soul. Let your breath slow down now. Feel the weight of the air as the carriage comes to a final, swaying halt. The dust of the French countryside settles quietly on the polished wheels. You are standing in the center of the world's most powerful court, a place where every shadow has an eye, and every whisper is recorded in the cold, marble walls. The first thing that hits Antonia as she steps out is the smell. It is a strange, heavy mixture of expensive perfumes, jasmine, and the underlying, sharp scent of a palace that houses thousands of people without modern plumbing. It is an olfactory tapestry, rich and decaying at the same time. She stands on the pavement, a small figure in a vast, golden sea. The palace stretches out in both directions like giant arms, constructed of pale stone, glowing in the late afternoon sun. Thousands of windows look down at her, like silent, unblinking eyes. She is led through the grand entrance. Her silk shoes make a soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap on the marble floors. The ceilings are so high they seem to hold their own clouds. Everywhere she looks, there is gold. Gold on the walls, gold on the furniture, gold embroidered into the heavy velvet curtains that block out the sun. It is beautiful, but it is a boring kind of beauty, a beauty so perfect and rigid that it leaves no room for a person to breathe. As she walks, she notices the people. The courtiers of Versailles stand in groups, their bodies stiff in their elaborate clothes. They do not look like people, they look like decorations. Their faces are painted with thick, white lead powder, their lips are stained a deep, bloody red. They watch her with a clinical curiosity. They are looking for a flaw. A stumble in her step, a tilt of her head that is too Austrian, a blink of her eye that shows fear. Antonia feels the mask she learned in Vienna tighten on her face. She moves like a ghost through the halls of mirrors. The hall of mirrors is a corridor of light and light. Hundreds of tall mirrors reflect the gardens outside and the flickering candles inside, creating an endless, dizzying loop of space. As she walks through it, she sees 1,000 versions of herself walking alongside her. 1,000 young girls, all trapped in the same blue silk, all moving toward a king they do not know. The light is silver and cold. It doesn't warm the skin, it only illuminates the surface. The ritual of the first meeting is slow and agonizing. She is led to the king, Louis XV. He is an old man, his eyes tired and heavy with the weight of a long, decadent reign. Beside him stands her husband, the Dauphin. He is shy, awkward, and silent. He does not look her in the eye. He looks at the floor, at the patterns in the parquet wood. The silence between them is a physical thing, a heavy curtain that neither knows how to pull aside. They are two children at the center of a grand, theatrical play, and they have forgotten their lines. As evening falls over Versailles, the palace doesn't sleep. It only shifts into a different kind of wakefulness. The boring details of the night begin. The lighting of the thousands of candles. Flick, flick, flick. One by one, the servants move through the galleries with long poles, bringing fire to the wax. The smell of burning tallow and beeswax fills the air. It is a slow, hypnotic process. The shadows retreat into the corners, only to dance more wildly as the flames flicker in the drafty halls. Antonia is shown to her apartments. They are grander than anything she had in Austria, but they feel cold. The walls are covered in silk tapestries depicting ancient hunts and forgotten gods. The bed is a mountain of feathers and gold leaf, surrounded by heavy, suffocating drapes. She is never alone. Even here, in her most private space, there are ladies in waiting, servants, and guards. The boring lack of privacy is the first true shock of her new life. To be a queen is to be a public monument. Think of her sitting at her dressing table for the first time in Versailles. The mirror is framed in silver. She looks at her reflection. The girl from Vienna is fading, replaced by the image of a French princess. She touches a small, porcelain jar of rouge. The powder is fine, like dust. She applies it to her cheeks, a bright, artificial circle of color. It is her armor. Outside the window, the gardens of Versailles stretch out into the darkness. They are perfectly symmetrical. Every tree is clipped into a geometric shape. Every path is straight. Every fountain is silent tonight, the water held back by the turn of a heavy, iron key. The nature here is not allowed to be wild. It is disciplined, just like she must be. The sound of the palace at night is a collection of small, repetitive noises. The ticking of 100 clocks, each slightly out of sync with the other. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The distant, muffled sound of laughter from the king's private chambers. The rustle of a guard's cloak in the hallway. The wind whistling through the cracks in the grand stone windows. These are the sounds that will become the background music of her life for the next 20 years. She lies in the giant bed, the silk sheets cool against her skin. The darkness is not complete, the glow of the candles in the hallway seeps through the bottom of the door. She thinks of the Rhine. She thinks of the island. She thinks of the mother who sent her here. But those thoughts are becoming harder to hold on to. Versailles is a place that consumes the past. It demands everything from the present. Let yourself feel the immense, quiet weight of the palace around you. Millions of pounds of stone, thousands of tons of gold, all pressing down on this one small room. The air is still. The night is long. But even in the silence, the palace is working. It is molding her. It is changing her. By morning, she will be one step further away from the girl who ran through the gardens of Schönbrunn. Sleep now, as the candles in the Hall of Mirrors finally burn down to nothing. The smoke curls toward the painted ceilings, disappearing among the gods and heroes of the past. The palace is at rest, but it never truly sleeps. It waits for the sun to rise, so the boring and beautiful rituals can begin all over again. The world of Versailles is now your world. The mirrors are waiting for your reflection. The gold is waiting for your touch. But for now, just listen to the silence. The heavy, magnificent silence of the House of Kings. The morning sun at Versailles does not simply rise, it performs an entry. The first light of dawn creeps slowly across the vast, gravel courtyards, touching the golden tips of the iron fences before sliding through the tall, heavy glass of the palace windows. Inside the bedchamber of the Dauphin, the air is still, thick with the lingering scent of last night's candles and the faint aroma of rosewater. There is a deep silence here, but it is a crowded silence. Outside the heavy, silk-draped bed, a world is waiting for her to wake up. In Versailles, a queen's sleep is not a private act, it is a matter of state. Let your mind settle into the rhythm of this slow, golden morning. Feel the softness of the pillows, the weight of the embroidered quilts, and the absolute, rigid structure of a day that is about to begin. The ritual begins not with an alarm, but with the soft, rhythmic clicking of heels on the parquet floor. Click, pause, click. The curtains are pulled back by a lady-in-waiting, the heavy fabric making a low, sweeping sound against the floor. SSHHH. The light floods in, but it is a filtered, gentle light. Antonia, now Marie Antoinette, stirs in the giant, gilded bed. This is the moment where her private self must vanish, and the Dauphin must appear. The ceremony of the levee, the rising, is a boring and intricate dance of rank and power. Imagine a room filled with women, each one standing in a specific spot based on how noble her family is. No one speaks above a whisper. The only sounds are the rustle of silk petticoats, the clinking of a silver wash basin, and the pouring of warm water into a porcelain bowl. Glug, splash, ripple. The water smells of orange blossoms, a light, sweet scent that fills the cold morning air. Antonia sits up. According to the rules, she cannot even wash her own hands. A towel must be presented to her by the highest-ranking woman in the room. If a more noble woman enters the room midway, the towel must be handed from the first woman to the second, then finally to the princess. It is a slow, repetitive process, a chain of etiquette that turns a simple morning wash into a 30-minute performance. To a 14-year-old girl from the more relaxed court of Vienna, this is an exhausting, beautiful madness. Now, think of the dressing. The boring details of her wardrobe are immense. Every morning, she is presented with a large, leather-bound book, the Gazette des Auteurs. Inside are small fabric swatches of every dress she owns. She doesn't pick a dress, she places a pin in the fabric she chooses for the day. The pages turn with a soft, paper rasp, flip, flip. Silk, satin, velvet, damask. Once the choice is made, the dressing begins. Layer by layer, she is built for the public eye. First, the chemise, thin and white, sliding over her shoulders like a cool mist. Then, the corset. The sound of the laces being pulled tight is a rhythmic, strained creak. Creak, pull, creak, pull. It restricts her breath, forcing her to stand with a rigid, artificial grace. She becomes a statue of cloth and bone. The petticoats are added next, heavy and voluminous, creating the wide, swaying silhouette of the French court. Finally, the grand habit, the formal dress. It is heavy with gold thread and tiny, hand-sewn pearls. As the fabric is draped over her, the weight settles on her shoulders like a physical burden. She is no longer a girl, she is a monument to the wealth of France. While her body is being dressed, her face and hair are being prepared. She sits before a mirror of polished silver. The boring rhythm of the hairbrush is hypnotic. Stroke, stroke, stroke. For an hour, her hair is pulled upward, teased, and powdered. The white powder falls like fine snow onto her shoulders, smelling of dry starch and lavender. It fills the air, catching in the sunlight, creating a hazy, dreamlike atmosphere in the room. Her face is painted with the mandatory white lead. It is a cold, thick paste that hides her youth. Then, the rouge. Two bright, perfect circles of red on her cheeks. In Versailles, rouge isn't meant to look natural, it is meant to signal status. It is a mask of health, a mask of joy, even if she feels only the heavy weight of the morning's expectations. The final touch is the perfume. A heavy, floral oil is dabbed onto her wrists and behind her ears. It is a scent that will follow her through the long, marble corridors, a lingering trail of jasmine and iris that tells everyone the Dauphine has passed by. Once the dressing is complete, the doors are thrown open. The boring ritual of the first breakfast begins. She sits at a small table, while dozens of courtiers stand and watch her eat. They watch the way she holds her spoon. They watch the way she sips her chocolate from a delicate, Sèvres porcelain cup. The clink of the spoon against the cup, tink, tink, is the only sound in the room. She must eat with a perfect, calculated elegance, never showing hunger, never showing haste. This is her life every single morning. A cycle of beauty and boredom, of luxury and loneliness. There is no space to simply be Antonia. There is only the Dauphine, the center of a clockwork universe. As you listen to the ticking of the clocks in this grand room, let yourself feel the strange peace of this routine. There is comfort in knowing exactly what will happen next. There is safety in the rules, even if they are suffocating. The morning is a shield. As long as she follows the steps, she is protected by the traditions of 1,000 years. Outside the window, the fountains of Versailles begin to play. The sound of the water rising and falling, a distant, rushing white noise, blends with the hushed whispers of the courtiers in the hallway. The palace is fully awake now. The machinery of the monarchy is turning. But inside her mind, Antonia is still half asleep. She is thinking of the simple breakfasts in Vienna, the sound of her sister's laughter, the way the grass felt under her bare feet. Those memories are like a distant music, fading away as the heavy, golden doors of her chamber are opened to lead her into the day. Step into the hallway with her. Feel the cool marble through the thin soles of her slippers. The air is grand, the ceilings are endless, and the day stretches out before her like a long, golden road. Sleep now, as the morning routine ends and the public life begins. The ritual is done. The mask is on. The Dauphine is ready. Let the quiet hum of the palace lull you into your own rest, away from the eyes of the court, away from the gold and the powder. The world is at peace, and the story continues, one measured step at a time. The corridors of Versailles at night are long, echoing, and filled with a cold, silver light that seems to seep through the very stones. In the heart of this vast palace, two young people are living a life that is both public and profoundly, deeply lonely. We are looking now at the relationship between Antonia and her husband, the Dauphin, the future Louis XVI. A man often described as a shadow, a king who preferred the silence of a workshop to the noise of a throne room. Their connection was not a lightning bolt of passion, it was a long, slow, and often painful unfolding of two souls who did not know how to speak the same language. Let the world around you grow dim. Feel the stillness of the palace at midnight, the way the shadows stretch across the parquet floors like long, dark fingers. Louis was a man of quiet habits. While the rest of Versailles danced and gossiped, he found his peace in the boring and repetitive motions of a craftsman. Imagine him in his private attic, high above the grand apartments. The air here smells of cold iron, sawdust, and oil. There is no gold here, no velvet, only the honest weight of tools. Clang, rasp, clang. He spends hours filing a piece of metal until it is perfectly smooth. He is obsessed with locks. The way a key turns, the way the internal tumblers fall into place with a precise, satisfying click. In a world of lies and politics, a lock was something he could understand. It was logical. It was silent. When he would descend from his workshop to join Antonia, he brought that silence with him. Picture them sitting together in the evenings. The room is lit by a few flickering candles. The light catches the diamonds on her bodice and the dull, grease-stained fingers of his hands. They are teenagers, burdened with the weight of an empire, yet they have nothing to say to each other. Antonia, vibrant, social, and needing warmth, would try to bridge the gap. She would talk of the theater, the gardens, the music she had heard. And Louis would nod. He would look at his shoes. He would offer a short, polite answer, and then the silence would return. It was a boring kind of tragedy. No grand arguments, no dramatic tears, just a steady, quiet distance that grew with every passing month. Louis was not unkind, he was simply paralyzed. He had been raised in a court that mocked his shyness, and in Antonia, he saw a mirror of everything he was not. She was grace, he was clumsy. She was light, he was a heavy, slow-moving cloud. The pressure from the outside world was relentless. Every morning, the courtiers would whisper. They would look at Antonia's belly, searching for the slight curve that would signal an heir. They would look at Louis with pity or scorn. The boring medical details of their private life were discussed over dinner tables and in the dark corners of the gardens. 7 years. For 7 long years, they lived together as husband and wife in name only. Think of the psychological weight of those years. The long nights in the grand, golden bed, lying inches apart, yet separated by a vast, invisible ocean. The sound of the wind rattling the tall windows. The rhythmic ticking of the clock on the mantel, tick-tock, tick-tock, marking the seconds of a marriage that felt like a waiting room. Antonia would often retreat into her own world of parties and fashion to numb the coldness, while Louis would retreat further into his locks and his hunting logs. Louis loved the hunt. It was his only escape from the suffocating etiquette of the court. He would spend all day in the forests of Versailles, tracking deer through the thick, damp undergrowth. The sound of the horses' hoofs on the soft earth, the barking of the hounds, the cold air filling his lungs. In the forest, he wasn't a king, he was a hunter. He would return to the palace exhausted, covered in mud, and fall into a deep, heavy sleep, often before Antonia had even begun her evening. They were like 2 ships passing in the night, both guided by stars they didn't quite understand. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, a strange kind of friendship began to form in the gaps between the silence. Louis began to trust her. He saw that she was his only true ally in a court filled with sharks. He began to ask her advice, not on politics, but on the small things. The color of a carriage, the arrangement of a garden. The boring growth of their bond was built on these small, mundane moments. A shared glance across a crowded room. A quiet walk in the park where they spoke of nothing but the weather and the trees. It was a marriage of endurance. They were both prisoners of their rank, and in each other, they found the only person who truly understood the weight of the chains. Antonia learned to be patient with his silence. She stopped expecting the romantic hero of the novels she read, and began to accept the man who brought her small, handmade gifts from his workshop. A silver key. A tiny, perfectly balanced lock. These were his poems. These were his declarations of love, spoken not in words, but in the language of cold, hard metal. As the years passed, the silence changed. It was no longer a wall, it became a sanctuary. In the private spaces of the Trianon, away from the prying eyes of the courtiers, they could simply be 2 people. No longer the king and queen, but Louis and Antonia. They would sit together in the sun, watching the shadows of the leaves dance on the grass. The sound of the bees humming in the clover, the distant splash of a fountain. These were the sounds of their true life. Louis's complexity lay in his simplicity. He wanted a life of routine, of books, and of physical labor. He was a man born for a different age, forced to play a role that demanded a ruthlessness he did not possess. Antonia saw this. She saw the gentleness in him that the world mistook for weakness. And she grew to protect him, to stand between him and the world that was beginning to grow angry. Think of them now, as the candles in their private study burn low. The room is warm, smelling of leather and old paper. Louis is reading a book on geography, his finger tracing the lines of a map. Antonia is sewing, the needle moving in a steady, rhythmic push, pull, push, pull. They do not speak, but they are present. The silence is comfortable. It is a blanket that covers them both, shielding them for just a moment from the storm that is gathering outside the palace gates. The world sees a failing marriage. The world sees a silent king and a flighty queen. But in the boring reality of the night, there is a bond of shared struggle. They are leaning on each other in the dark. Two lonely children, holding hands as they walk toward a future that is becoming darker with every sunset. Let yourself feel that quiet bond now. The way the heart settles when it is no longer fighting for attention. The way the breath slows when the need for words has vanished. The Palace of Versailles is a place of noise, but in this room, there is only the peace of the silent king. Sleep now, as the light in the study is finally extinguished. The shadows of the locks and the tools rest on the walls. The maps are folded. The needle is put away. The world is at rest, and the two of them are safe in the silence, for one more night. The weight of a crown is heavy, but the weight of an empty cradle is heavier still. As the years began to slide past in the golden halls of Versailles, the initial excitement of the royal wedding began to turn into a cold, whispering pressure. We are entering the middle years of the 1770s, a time when the boring passage of months became a slow torture for the young queen. In the world of the 18th century, a queen had only one true purpose in the eyes of the state: to provide an heir, to continue the bloodline, to ensure that the flickering flame of the Bourbon dynasty did not go out. Let your mind drift into the quiet, heavy atmosphere of the queen's private chambers. The air is still, filled with the scent of lilies and the dry, metallic smell of old tapestries. Every morning, as we have seen, the curtains were pulled back, and the world rushed in. But now, there was a new look in the eyes of the courtiers. A searching look. They scanned her face for a sign of morning sickness. They watched her gait, looking for the slight change in posture that would signal a pregnancy. When they saw nothing, the whispers would begin. A soft, rhythmic rustling of voices in the hallways, like the sound of dry leaves skittering over marble. Is she still childless? Is the king unable? Is the alliance failing? Antonia felt these whispers like tiny, cold needles against her skin. Imagine the boring repetition of the letters from her mother in Vienna. Empress Maria Theresa was relentless. Every letter contained the same question, phrased in a dozen different ways. Have you done your duty? Do you realize the danger you are in? A queen without a child is a queen without a future. The ink on the paper felt heavy, the words a physical weight that Antonia had to carry through the long, sunlit galleries of the palace. She was a girl in her late teens, living under a microscope. Every month that passed without news was seen as a political failure. Think of the long, silent dinners with Louis. The clinking of silver against gold plates. Clink, clink. They would look at each other across the table, the space between them filled with the ghost of the child that had not yet arrived. Louis would retreat into his clocks, and Antonia, out of a quiet, desperate loneliness, began to retreat into the night. This was the era of the flighty queen. To escape the burden of the air, she turned to the boring and repetitive world of high-stakes gambling and late-night balls. The sound of the cards being shuffled, flick flick flick, the clatter of dice on a green baize table, the rhythmic swell of the orchestra's violins. She was trying to outrun the silence of her nursery. She would dance until the sun began to touch the tops of the trees in the park, returning to the palace as the rest of the court was waking up. But even in the middle of a crowded ballroom, the burden was there. She would see a courtier's wife with a young child, and the mask would slip for just a second. The palace was a place of 1,000 eyes, and none of them were kind. The pamphlets in Paris were beginning to grow cruel. They called her the Austrian woman. They mocked the king's perceived weakness. The silence of the royal bedchamber was becoming a national scandal. Think of the boring medical consultations. The whispers of doctors in the shadows. The strange, uncomfortable advice given by aunts and ambassadors. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a cure. And through it all, Antonia had to remain composed. She had to stand at the center of the court, draped in diamonds and silk, pretending that the hollow ache in her heart was not there. Then, in 1777, a visitor arrived who would change everything. Her brother, Emperor Joseph II. He did not come as a diplomat, he came as a brother. Imagine them walking together in the gardens of the Trianon, away from the guards. The sound of their boots on the gravel, crunch, 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 the only sound in the cool, morning air. He spoke to Louis, man to man, workshop to workshop. He spoke of the simple, boring realities of marriage and biology. And slowly, the lock was turned. The internal tumblers finally fell into place. In early 1778, the miracle finally happened. Antonia felt the first, faint fluttering of life. Imagine the change in the atmosphere of the palace. The boring weight of the previous 7 years vanished, replaced by a tense, electric anticipation. The whispers changed. Now they were counting the days. The queen was no longer a failure, she was a vessel for the future. The pregnancy was a public event. She could not even be ill in private. Every movement was tracked, every craving recorded. But for Antonia, there was a new, quiet peace. She spent more time in her gardens, watching the swans on the water. The slow, rhythmic ripple of the lake, the gentle sway of the willow trees. She was no longer running. She was waiting. The birth itself, in December 1778, was a nightmare of etiquette. According to the ancient rules of Versailles, the boring and public nature of the monarchy meant that anyone could enter the room to witness the birth of a royal child. The bedchamber was packed with people. Courtiers stood on chairs to get a better view. The air became hot, thick, and suffocating. When the child was finally born, Antonia fainted from the heat and the exhaustion. The windows had to be broken to let in the cold, winter air. Crash! The sound of glass hitting the floor. And then, the first cry. It was a girl. Marie Therese. Though the court was disappointed it wasn't a boy. Antonia was filled with a fierce, quiet joy. She held the child in the silence of the night, away from the crowds. "You shall be mine," she whispered. "You shall not belong to the state as I do." The burden of the air had not been fully lifted, the kingdom still demanded a son, but the ice had broken. The silence in the marriage was gone. Louis was transformed, becoming a doting, if still quiet, father. They had found a shared purpose in the boring and beautiful tasks of parenthood. The nursery, once a place of shadows, was now filled with the sound of a rocking cradle. Creak, sway, creak, sway. As you listen to the steady rhythm of that cradle, let yourself feel the relief that Antonia felt. The long years of waiting were over. The pressure had eased, if only for a moment. The sun was setting over Versailles, casting long, golden shadows over the gardens, but inside the palace, a new light had been lit. Think of the queen now, sitting by the fire, the child asleep in her arms. The diamonds are gone. The rouge has been washed away. She is just a mother, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of her daughter. The clocks of Versailles are still ticking, tick-tock, tick-tock, but the sound no longer feels like a countdown to disaster. It feels like a heartbeat. Sleep now, as the winter wind howls around the stone chimneys of the palace. Inside, it is warm. The heavy curtains are drawn. The burden has been shared, and the night is peaceful. Rest in the knowledge that even the longest winter eventually turns to spring. The nursery is full, the mother is at rest, and the story moves forward, into the light. The air in the palace of Versailles has changed. It is no longer filled with the light scent of springtime gardens, but with the heavy, stagnant smell of old age and medicinal herbs. We are in May 1774. Deep inside the royal apartments, King Louis XV is fading. Smallpox has claimed his body, and as his life flickers like a dying candle, a profound, eerie silence has fallen over the entire kingdom. No one speaks above a whisper. The courtiers stand in the long galleries, their eyes fixed on the door of the king's chamber, waiting for the signal that one era has ended and another is about to begin. Let your breath become slow and steady. Imagine the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the palace clocks, tick-tock, tick-tock, each second bringing a young couple closer to a weight they are not yet ready to carry. Antonia and Louis are waiting in a room far from the sickbed. They are sitting together, perhaps for the first time, feeling the true gravity of their positions. They are not just a husband and wife tonight, they are the shadows of a crown. The boring details of the transition are already in motion. Outside in the courtyard, the horses are harnessed to the carriages. The servants are packing the essential chests. According to the rigid rules of the court, as soon as the king draws his last breath, the new king and queen must leave Versailles immediately to avoid the contagion of the disease. The tension is a physical thing, a cold mist that clings to the skin. Then, it happens. The sound of a single candle being extinguished. The signal. A sudden, thunderous noise erupts in the hallway outside their door. It is the sound of hundreds of boots running across the parquet floor, thump 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 thump, like a sudden storm breaking over the palace. It is the courtiers. Like a flock of birds sensing a change in the wind, they are rushing to be the first to bow before the new power. The doors are thrown open. The crowd pours in, their faces pale in the candlelight. They fall to their knees in a rhythmic, sweeping motion, like grain bowing in a field. The king is dead, they cry. Long live the king. Antonia and Louis stand up, their hands finding each other in the dark. They are 19 and 20 years old. The reality hits them like a physical blow. Legend says they both fell to their knees, crying out to the shadows. "Oh God, guide us, protect us, we are too young to reign." The boring safety of their youth has vanished in a single breath. They are now the sun and the moon of France. The departure from Versailles that night is a ghost-like procession. The carriages move quickly, their wheels rattling over the cobblestones, clack clack, clack clack, leaving the dying king and the old world behind. They travel to the chateau of Choisy. The night air is cool, smelling of damp leaves and the turning season. Inside the carriage, the silence has returned, but it is a different silence now. It is the silence of responsibility. The first weeks of the new reign are a blur of boring and repetitive ceremonies. Every morning, Antonia wakes up not just as a woman, but as the Queen of France. The levee we saw before becomes even more intense. There are more eyes, more expectations. Every signature she makes on a document, every tilt of her head during a council meeting, is analyzed for its political meaning. She is no longer allowed to be a girl. She must be an icon. Louis, the silent king, is now the center of a storm of paperwork. Imagine him sitting at a grand desk, his brow furrowed, his fingers stained with ink. The locks and the tools are pushed to the corner of the room. He must now look at maps of the grain supply, reports from the army, and the endless, complicated ledgers of the national debt. The boring reality of kingship is not about glory, it is about the slow, grinding work of a bureaucracy. Antonia tries to help him in her own way. She brings a sense of life to the cold stone of the palace. She orders new flowers for the tables. She asks for more music in the evenings. The sound of a harpsichord, plink, 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 drifting through the open windows of the chateau. She is trying to soften the blow of the crown. She is trying to create a space where they can still breathe. But the shadow of the old king's reign is long. The people of France are hungry, and they are watching this young, beautiful couple with a mixture of hope and suspicion. The boring price of bread is the only thing that matters to the woman in the street in Paris, yet in Versailles, the talk is still about the height of hairstyles and the color of silk. Antonia is caught in the middle. She wants to be loved, but she doesn't yet understand the world outside the palace gates. The coronation at Reims in 1775 is a masterpiece of boring and magnificent ritual. The air in the great cathedral is heavy with the scent of ancient incense and burning wax. The light filters through the stained glass, casting pools of blue, red, and purple light onto the stone floor. Louis is dressed in heavy, ermine-lined robes, the crown of Charlemagne being lowered onto his head. It is so heavy he can barely hold his neck straight. Antonia watches from the gallery. She is not crowned alongside him, according to the custom, but she is the star of the ceremony. Her dress is a cloud of white and silver. Her diamonds catch the light, creating tiny, dancing stars on the walls of the cathedral. As the trumpets sound, a long, golden blast that echoes through the rafters, she feels a surge of pride. This is her moment. This is her kingdom. But as the ceremony ends and the bells of Reims begin to ring, dong, 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 she sees the expression on Louis's face. He looks tired. He looks overwhelmed. The crown has left a physical mark on his forehead, a red line where the gold pressed into his skin. The return to Versailles is a journey into reality. The boring routine of the court returns. The meetings, the dinners, the gambling, the fashion. But the world is different now. They are no longer the children waiting in the wings. They are the lead actors in a play that is becoming more complex with every passing day. As you listen to the rhythmic breathing of the palace tonight, let yourself feel the weight of that transition. The way a life can change in the space of a single heartbeat. The way the gold of a crown can feel like lead. Antonia is sitting by her window now, looking out at the gardens she now owns. The statues are silent. The fountains are still. The moon is a silver sliver in the sky. Think of her fingers tracing the edge of her new royal seal. The cold metal, the intricate design of the lilies of France. She is the queen. But in the quiet of the night, she is still the girl from Vienna, wondering if she has the strength to stand against the wind that is beginning to blow. Sleep now, as the new king and queen settle into their first year of power. The palace is quiet, but the machinery of the state is turning. The past is buried, the future is a map they cannot yet read. Rest in the silence of the night, away from the weight of the crown, away from the eyes of the world. The stars are constant, and the story is just beginning its most beautiful, and most dangerous, chapter. The atmosphere of Versailles is often built not of stone, but of silk. As we move further into the 1770s, the young queen begins to realize that in a world where she has no real political power, her image is her only weapon. We are entering the era of the fashion revolution. A time when the boring and repetitive acts of dressing and grooming became a grand, artistic rebellion. For Marie Antoinette, clothes were not just fabric, they were a language. A way to say, I am here. I am powerful, and I will not be ignored. Close your eyes and imagine the soft, rhythmic sound of scissors cutting through heavy, expensive silk. Snip, snip, snip. The air is filled with the scent of rose-scented starch, lavender, and the faint, metallic smell of silver needles. At the center of this revolution is a woman named Rose Bertin. A commoner, a dressmaker, but in the eyes of the queen, she is a minister of fashion. Imagine their secret meetings in the queen's private chambers. The floor is covered in boring but beautiful scraps of lace, ribbon, and velvet. They spend hours looking at the way light hits a specific shade of blue, or the way a ruffle of lace falls against the skin. This is not just vanity. It is the creation of a legend. The most iconic part of this revolution was, of course, the hair. The poofs. Imagine Antonia sitting for 3-4 hours at a time, her neck muscles straining under the weight of an architectural masterpiece. Her hair is pulled upward over a wire frame, padded with wool, and stiffened with a thick, white pomade made of animal fat and scented oils. Then, the powder. A fine, white mist that settles over her like a layer of fresh snow. But the boring details are what truly made the poof spectacular. It was a stage for her life. If she was happy, there were tiny, silk birds nesting in her curls. If she was mourning, there were black ribbons and veils of gauze. Most famously, when a French ship won a battle, a literal, miniature wooden ship, with sails and tiny cannons, was nestled into the height of her hair. As she moved through the hall of mirrors, the ship would sway with her every step, a slow, rhythmic motion that fascinated the court. Think of the sound of her walking in these grand gowns. The swish, swish, swish of the heavy silk skirts, some of them so wide she had to turn sideways just to pass through a doorway. The fabric was often embroidered with thousands of tiny, silver threads, catching the light of the candles and turning her into a walking constellation. To wear these clothes was to be a performer. To stand still was to be a statue. But there was a boring price to this elegance. The cost of these dresses was astronomical. Every week, a new design. Every month, a new trend. The Queen was setting the rhythm for all of Europe. From London to St. Petersburg, women were trying to mimic the Marie Antoinette style. But in the streets of Paris, where the bread was becoming scarce, the people saw these dresses not as art, but as a theft. Antonia, in her youth and her isolation, did not yet hear the growing anger. She was obsessed with the details. The way a certain ribbon matched the color of her eyes. The way a pair of silk shoes, with their delicate, red heels, felt on the marble floors. Tap, tap, tap. She owned hundreds of pairs, each one a tiny, fragile piece of art, designed to last only a few hours. As the years progressed, she grew tired of the heavy, formal, grand habit. She began to crave a different kind of boring simplicity. This led to her most controversial fashion choice, the chemise à la reine. Imagine a simple dress of white muslin. Light, airy, and thin. To us, it looks like a summer sundress. To the French court, it looked like she was walking around in her underwear. The scandal was quiet but deep. The silk merchants of Lyons were furious because she was wearing cotton instead of silk. The traditionalists were horrified because she looked like a commoner. But Antonia loved the freedom of it. She loved the way the wind moved through the light fabric as she walked through the gardens. The way the white muslin reflected the sun, making her look like a ghost among the trees. Let yourself feel the texture of these fabrics now. The coolness of the silk, the softness of the muslin, the weight of the gold embroidery. The world of fashion is a world of touch and sight. Every morning, the Queen chooses her armor for the day. Every evening, she is carefully, slowly undressed, the pins removed, the hair unpowdered, the mask taken off. The ritual of the fashion revolution was a way for her to control her environment. If she couldn't control the king's ministers, she could control the height of her hair. If she couldn't control the rumors in Paris, she could control the shade of her ribbons. It was a boring and beautiful distraction from the heavy, gray clouds that were starting to gather on the horizon. Think of her now, sitting by the fire in her dressing room. The candles are low. The boring work of the day is done. She looks at a single, stray feather on the floor, a remnant of today's masterpiece. She is the most beautiful woman in Europe. She is a fashion icon. But she is also a woman who is becoming increasingly disconnected from the reality of her people. The rhythm of the fashion world is fast, but the rhythm of history is slow and relentless. While she is deciding on the next color for her slippers, the world outside is changing. But for tonight, there is only the beauty. There is only the silk. There is only the soft, rhythmic breathing of a queen at rest. Sleep now, as the gowns are put back into their cedar chests. The ribbons are folded. The hair powder is swept away. The palace is quiet, and the fashion revolution is over for today. Rest in the silence, away from the diamonds and the lace. The night is timeless, and the story continues, one stitch at a time. As the weight of the crown grew heavier, and the eyes of the court became more suffocating, Antonia began to dream of a place where she could simply breathe. A place where the walls did not have ears, and the mirrors did not judge. We are moving now to the far edges of the Versailles Gardens, away from the gold and the marble, to a small, elegant chateau known as Le Petit Trianon. Given to her by Louis as a gift shortly after his ascension, he told her, "This pleasure house is yours." It was here that the Queen of France created her own world, a sanctuary of boring and beautiful isolation. Let your mind drift away from the grand halls now. Imagine walking down a long, winding gravel path. The sound of your footsteps is a soft, rhythmic crunch, 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 in the cool morning air. The air here smells different. It doesn't smell of heavy perfumes and candle smoke, it smells of damp grass, blooming lilac, and fresh, running water. The Petit Trianon is a masterpiece of quiet architecture. It is small, square, and perfectly balanced. There are no grand staircases designed to intimidate, only light, airy rooms with tall windows that let the outside in. Inside, the boring and repetitive details of her life changed completely. Here, there was no levee. There was no crowd of courtiers watching her wake up. She forbade anyone from coming to Trianon without her express invitation. Even the king, it was said, had to ask for permission to visit her here. Close your eyes and imagine the interior. The walls are painted in a soft, pale green, the color of new leaves. The furniture is simple, made of light wood with clean lines. The floors are not marble, but polished oak that feels warm and solid. Antonia would spend her days here dressed in her simple muslin gowns, the chemise à la reine, looking more like a country lady than a queen of an empire. The boring activities of Trianon were her greatest joy. She would spend hours in the gardens, not looking at the plants, but working with them. She loved to watch the gardeners planting the bulbs for the spring. The rhythmic motion of the spade entering the earth, thunk, 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 the smell of the dark, rich soil. She had exotic trees brought from all over the world, magnolias, cedars, and weeping willows that dipped their branches into the small, man-made lakes. At Trianon, time moved at a different pace. The clocks still ticked, tick-tock, tick-tock, but they didn't feel like a countdown to a ceremony. They felt like a heartbeat. Antonia would sit by the window and sew, the needle moving in a slow, steady rhythm. Or she would play the harp, the strings vibrating under her fingers with a soft, ethereal sound that drifted out through the open doors and into the trees. But the heart of Trianon was her theater. A tiny, jewel box of a room hidden behind the trees. Here, she and her closest friends would perform plays. Antonia loved to play the roles of simple country girls, milkmaids, and shepherdesses. Imagine the irony. The most powerful woman in Europe, dressing up as a peasant for fun, while the real peasants of France were struggling to survive. To her, it was an escape. To the world outside, it was proof that she didn't care. But in the quiet, boring reality of the theater, she was simply a woman trying to find a voice that wasn't scripted by the state. The evenings at Trianon were a soft, amber glow. There were no grand banquets. Instead, small, intimate dinners with her chosen few. The food was simple, fresh fruit from the orchards, milk from the dairy, and bread baked in the small kitchen nearby. The sound of laughter was real here, not the forced, musical titter of the court, but the deep, honest sound of friends who were at ease. As the sun would set over the Trianon, the shadows of the trees would grow long, stretching across the perfectly manicured lawns. The white stone of the chateau would turn a soft, glowing pink in the twilight. Antonia would walk through the gardens as the first stars appeared. The only sound was the wind in the leaves, a gentle, shushing sound. Shh, 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 and the distant, repetitive croaking of frogs in the pond. In these moments, she was happy. She felt a sense of ownership over her life that she could never find at Versailles. She was the architect of her own peace. But Trianon was also her greatest mistake. By closing the doors to the court, she allowed the rumors to grow. Because the people could not see her, they imagined the worst. They imagined orgies, they imagined conspiracies, they imagined a queen who had turned her back on her people. But inside the walls of Trianon, the reality was much more boring. It was a woman reading a book by a fire. It was a mother playing with her children on the grass. It was a friend writing letters to her family in Vienna. It was the quiet, steady rhythm of a life that was trying to find its own way. Think of the boring beauty of the mirrors at Trianon. They were not the giant, overwhelming mirrors of the Hall of Mirrors. They were small, framed in wood, showing her a face that was tired, but relaxed. She would look at her reflection and see Antonia again, the girl who loved the gardens of Schönbrunn. For a few hours a day, she could pretend the crown didn't exist. She could pretend the angry voices in Paris were just a dream. But even at Trianon, the world would eventually intrude. A messenger would arrive with a heavy, leather bag of documents. A servant would announce that a minister was waiting at the gate. The dream would break, and the queen would have to put on her mask again. She would leave the green rooms and the simple muslin, and travel back to the marble and the gold. As you listen to the silence of this sanctuary, let yourself feel the peace she felt. The relief of being unobserved. The luxury of a quiet afternoon. The Palace of Versailles is a machine, but the Trianon was a heart. Sleep now, as the mist begins to rise from the lakes of Trianon. The swans are tucking their heads under their wings. The theater is dark. The harp is silent. The candles in the small chateau are being extinguished one by one, the smoke curling into the cool, night air. Antonia is asleep in her simple bed, dreaming of a world without titles, a world of grass and wind. Rest in the stillness of the trees. The world is vast, and the shadows are soft. The night is a gift, a private space where you, like the queen, can finally be yourself. The story rests here, in the quiet gardens, waiting for the morning to bring the reality of the world back to the gate. Deep within the gardens of Trianon, where the shadows of the weeping willows touch the surface of a quiet, artificial lake, we find the queen's most intimate creation. It is called the Hameau de la Reine, the queen's hamlet. Imagine stepping away from the cold, white stone of the palaces, and walking onto a path of soft earth and moss. The air here is different, it carries the boring and beautiful scents of a working farm, damp straw, sweet hay, and the sharp, clean smell of freshly turned soil. For Marie Antoinette, this was the final step in her escape. Not just a private house, but a private world, designed to look like a rustic village in the French countryside. Let your mind drift into this landscape of artificial simplicity. The world is quiet here, the only sound is the rhythmic, gentle of the wind moving through the reeds at the water's edge. The hamlet is a collection of small, thatched roof cottages, built to look old and weathered. The architects even painted artificial cracks on the walls and grew moss on the roofs to give the illusion of a place untouched by time. It is a masterpiece of boring detail. There is a farmhouse, a mill, a dairy, and even a pigeon loft. But inside these rustic buildings, the reality was still royal. The cottage that looked like a peasant's hut on the outside was lined with fine silk and heated by expensive stoves on the inside. It was a play, a living theater where the queen was the lead actress, playing the role of a simple countrywoman. Close your eyes and imagine Antonia walking through this village in the early morning. The sun is just beginning to burn off the mist rising from the lake. She is dressed in her white muslin gown, a straw hat tied under her chin with a pale blue ribbon. There are no guards here, no shouting courtiers. Only the rhythmic, steady sound of her footsteps on the wooden bridge. Thump, thump, thump. She heads toward the dairy. This was her favorite place. Inside, the walls were lined with cool, white marble. The boring task of making butter and cream was turned into an elegant ritual. The milk was kept in delicate Sèvres porcelain bowls, decorated with hand-painted flowers. Antonia would watch as the cream was skimmed from the top, a slow, repetitive motion that calmed her mind. The air was cool and smelled of fresh milk and cold stone. In these moments, she could pretend that the outside world, with its debts, its scandals, and its growing anger, did not exist. But the hamlet was not just a stage for her. It was a real farm. There were cows, sheep, and goats, all of them carefully selected for their beauty and gentleness. The sound of the cowbells, a soft, rhythmic clink, clank, clink, provided the background music for her afternoons. She loved to watch the animals. Their lives were simple, governed only by the sun and the seasons. They didn't care about the height of her hair or the price of her diamonds. Think of the mill, its large wooden wheel turning slowly in the water. Creak, splash, creak, splash. The water falls in a steady, silver curtain, creating a white noise that drowns out the whispers of Versailles. Antonia would sit by the mill and watch the dragonflies dancing over the water. Their wings are like tiny, iridescent jewels, moving in quick, rhythmic bursts. To her, this was the ultimate luxury. The luxury of being boring. The luxury of not being important for a few hours. However, this village of hers was also a dangerous illusion. While she was playing with her goats and making butter in porcelain bowls, the real peasants of France were living in huts that were not painted to look old, but were crumbling from actual age and poverty. To the people of Paris, the hameau was a mockery. They saw a queen who had spent millions of livres to build a fake village, while they struggled to buy a single loaf of real bread. But inside the bubble of the hamlet, Antonia saw only the beauty. She believed she was honoring nature, not insulting it. The evenings at the hamlet were a time of deep, amber light. The sun would sink behind the thatched roofs, casting long, golden shadows over the lake. The ducks would settle into the reeds, their soft, rhythmic quacking fading into the twilight. Antonia would walk back to her house, her basket filled with fresh eggs or flowers from her garden. The boring satisfaction of a day spent in the sun. As you listen to the silence of this village, let yourself feel the stillness she sought. The way the heart slows down when it is surrounded by green things. The way the breath becomes deeper when the air is clean. The hameau was her heart's desire, a place where she could finally be the Antonia she was meant to be before the crown was placed on her head. But the night is coming. The mist is thickening over the water, obscuring the fake cracks on the cottage walls. The boring reality of the world is waiting at the edge of the gardens. Soon, she will have to leave this village, take off her straw hat, and return to the gold and the mirrors of the great palace. Think of her now, standing on the bridge, looking at her reflection in the dark water. The moon is rising, a pale, silver circle in the sky. The hamlet is silent. The animals are asleep. The mill wheel has stopped. In this moment, she is at peace. She is not a queen, she is not an icon, she is just a woman in a white dress, standing in the quiet of a summer night. Sleep now, as the candles in the hamlet are extinguished one by one. The smoke curls into the cool, night air, vanishing into the trees. Rest in the knowledge that even in the middle of a storm, there is always a garden. There is always a quiet place where the soul can rest. The story continues, but for tonight, the village is safe. The lake is still. And the night is your own. The air of Versailles is thick tonight, not with the scent of flowers, but with the cold, suffocating weight of a secret. We are moving into the year 1785. A time when a single piece of jewelry would do more damage to the crown than 1,000 riots. This is the story of the diamond necklace. A tale of greed, shadows, and a queen who was being hunted by a ghost she didn't even know existed. Imagine a necklace so heavy, so bright, that it seemed to contain all the light of France. 647 diamonds, arranged in a cascading web of fire. Let your mind settle into the quiet, rhythmic darkness of the palace at midnight. The shadows are long, and the only sound is the steady, repetitive ticking of a clock in a darkened hallway. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The story begins in the workshop of the crown jewelers, Baimer and Bassenge. For years, they have been obsessed with a single task. They have traveled across Europe to find the most perfect diamonds in existence. Imagine the boring and meticulous work of a jeweler. The tiny, silver magnifying glass, the steady, rhythmic grinding of stone against stone, rit, until the diamond is clear as a drop of water. They created a necklace originally intended for the old king's mistress, Madame du Barry. But the king died, and the jewelers were left with a masterpiece that no one could afford. They offered it to Marie Antoinette. But in a strange twist of fate, the woman known for her love of fashion said no. France has more need of a ship than a necklace, she said. It was a rare moment of wisdom, but the shadows were already moving against her. Enter Jeanne de la Motte, a woman with a sharp mind and a hollow heart. She lived in the boring and dusty corners of Paris, dreaming of the gold she saw through the palace gates. She devised a plan so complex and so quiet that it would take months to unfold. She convinced a high-ranking cardinal, Prince Louis de Rohan, that the queen secretly desired the necklace, but could not buy it openly. Imagine the letters. Jeanne forged them, using the queen's name on thick, expensive parchment that smelled of counterfeit roses. The cardinal, desperate to regain the queen's favor, read these letters in the dim light of his study. The sound of the paper rustling, crinkle, crinkle, was the sound of a trap being set. Then came the night of the gardens. A midnight meeting in a dark grove at Versailles. Imagine the cardinal waiting in the shadows, the air damp and smelling of wet leaves. A woman appeared, dressed in a white muslin gown, her face hidden by a veil. It was not the queen, but a girl hired to play the part. She spoke only a few words, a soft, rhythmic whisper. You may hope that the past will be forgotten. She handed him a rose. The cardinal was convinced. The trap was shut. The boring and technical parts of the fraud followed. The cardinal negotiated with the jewelers. He showed them the forged signatures. He took the necklace, that mountain of ice and light, and handed it to Jeanne, believing she would take it to the queen. Instead, Jeanne's husband took the diamonds, prying them from their gold settings with a small, rhythmic clink, pop, clink, pop. He sold them piece by piece in the back streets of London. Antonia knew nothing. She was in her gardens at Trianon, playing with her children, watching the swans. The boring piece of her life was about to be shattered by a bill she never signed for a necklace she never saw. When the truth finally came out, it was like a sudden, cold wind through the palace. Bamer, the jeweler, approached the Queen's lady-in-waiting, asking for payment. The confusion turned to horror. Antonia was summoned. Louis was summoned. The cardinal was arrested in his full robes, right in the middle of a ceremony. The trial was a public spectacle. It lasted for months, a boring and endless cycle of testimonies, documents, and lies. Although the Queen was innocent, the people of France did not believe her. To them, she was already the woman of the fashion revolution. They believed she had used Jean to get the diamonds. They believed she was a liar. Jean was caught and branded with a V for Volius, thief, on her shoulder. But in the eyes of the public, it was the Queen who was truly branded. The boring repetition of the scandal in the pamphlets was relentless. Every day, a new story. Every day, a new insult. The necklace was gone, broken into 1,000 pieces, and so was the last of the people's respect for the crown. Think of Antonia now, sitting in her private room. The boring weight of the scandal is heavy on her chest. She looks in the mirror, the same mirror that once showed her a fashion icon. Now it shows a woman who is feared and hated. The diamonds of the necklace were meant to be an ornament, but they became a chain. The sound of the palace at night has changed. The whispers are no longer about hairstyles, they are about survival. The wind rattling the window panes sounds like the chanting of a mob. Howl, rattle, howl. The silence of the Trianon is gone, replaced by the noise of a kingdom that is losing its patience. Antonia begins to realize that she can never go back to being just a girl in a white dress. The boring safety of her bubble has burst. She is now the target of a nation's anger. She sits by her fire, watching the orange flames turn to gray ash. The same way her reputation has burned. As you listen to the rhythmic breathing of the night, let yourself feel the weight of this turning point. The moment when the light of the diamonds turned into the fire of revolution. The Palace of Versailles is still grand, but the foundation is cracking. Sleep now, as the ghosts of the diamond necklace fade into the shadows. The cardinal is in exile. Jean is in prison. And the diamonds are scattered across the world, cold and silent. Antonia is asleep, but her dreams are troubled. The world is changing, and the night is no longer a sanctuary. Rest in the stillness. The stars are constant even when the world below is in chaos. The story moves forward, toward the storm. The grandeur of Versailles often feels like a cold, echoing hollow, but in the quietest corners of the palace, away from the diamonds and the scandals, there was a world of soft, rhythmic breathing and the gentle scent of lavender. This was the world of Antonia as a mother. We are moving into the mid-1780s, a time when the Queen of France found her only true peace in the boring and beautiful routine of the nursery. Here, she was not the Austrian woman or the fashion icon, she was simply a mother, trying to protect her children from the cold wind that was beginning to howl at the palace gates. Let your mind settle into the stillness of a darkened nursery. The only sound is the steady, slow creak, sway, of a wooden cradle. Antonia had 4 children. Marie Therese, the firstborn, who brought the first light to her eyes. Louis Joseph, the Dauphin, the long-awaited heir. Louis Charles, and the baby. Sophie Beatrice. For a few years, her life was governed by the boring and rhythmic cycles of childhood. The sound of small feet running over the wooden floors, patter, 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 the high, musical sound of a child's laughter echoing in the gardens of Trianon. These were the sounds that finally drowned out the whispers of the court. She took her role as a mother with a quiet, unexpected seriousness. She did not want them to be raised in the rigid, frozen etiquette of Versailles. She brought them to her hamlet, the little farm we saw before. Imagine her sitting on the grass with them, the sun warm on her face, watching them play with the goats and the lambs. The sound of the animals, the rustle of the leaves, the feeling of a small hand in hers. This was her sanctuary. But in the shadow of the palace, tragedy was waiting, patient and cold. The boring reality of life in the 18th century meant that even a king's children were not safe from the darkness of disease. First, there was Sophie, the baby. She was only 11 months old when the light in her eyes began to fade. Imagine the quiet in the queen's room, the only sound being the labored, rhythmic breathing of a sick child. Hiss, wheeze, hiss. Antonia stayed by her side, the Queen of France sitting on a small wooden chair for hours, watching the candles burn down to nothing. When the child died, the silence that followed was heavier than any crown. Antonia's grief was private, but deep. She had a portrait painted of herself with her children, but the empty cradle of Sophie was included, a boring and heartbreaking reminder of the gap in her heart. Then, the darkness came for the Dauphin. Louis Joseph. He was the future of France, the boy who was supposed to carry the weight of the Bourbon line. But he was born with a fragile spine, a slow, grinding illness that began to twist his small body. Think of the boring and painful treatments he had to endure. The heavy, iron braces, the long days lying still on a hard bed. Antonia spent every possible moment with him. She read to him in a soft, rhythmic voice, stories of knights and distant lands, trying to use her words to carry him away from his pain. As the political situation in Paris began to boil, Antonia was trapped in the quiet of a dying child's room. While the people were shouting for bread, she was counting the slow, weakening beats of her son's heart. Thump, pause, thump. He died in June 1789. Right as the world was about to break apart. The loss of the Dauphin changed her forever. The last of her youth vanished in that funeral procession. She had to stand in public, draped in heavy, black crape, while the crowds in the streets did not offer sympathy, but only more anger. They did not see a grieving mother, they saw only a queen who was taking up too much of the nation's money. But in the nights, when the mask was off, Antonia turned to her surviving children, Marie Therese and Louis Charles. They became her world. The boring tasks of motherhood were now her only anchor. Brushing her daughter's hair, stroke, 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 teaching her son his letters. She became more protective, more fierce. She saw the way the world was looking at them, and she knew she had to be their shield. The remaining boy, Louis Charles, was full of life. He loved the gardens. He had his own little plot of earth where he grew flowers. The sound of his small spade hitting the dirt, chink, 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 was a sound of hope in a palace that was beginning to feel like a tomb. Antonia would watch him, her heart a mixture of love and a cold, paralyzing fear for his future. Motherhood had taught her a new kind of strength. A strength that wasn't built on fashion or status, but on the quiet, steady endurance of love. She was no longer the girl who wanted to be the center of the party. She was a woman who had seen the bottom of a grave and knew that the only things that truly mattered were the people she could hold in her arms. Think of her now, sitting in the dim light of the evening. Her 2 children are asleep nearby. The boring and repetitive ticking of the nursery clock is the only sound. Tick-tock, tick-tock. She looks at their sleeping faces, so innocent, so unaware of the storm that is gathering outside the gates. The diamonds in her jewel box are cold, but the warmth of her children's breath is the only thing that keeps her alive. As you listen to the stillness of this night, let yourself feel the weight of her grief, but also the beauty of her love. The Palace of Versailles is a place of stone, but a mother's heart is a place of fire. Sleep now, as the candles in the nursery are dimmed. The shadows are long, and the night is deep. Rest in the knowledge that love is the only thing that remains when everything else is stripped away. The story moves toward the darkness of the revolution, but for tonight, there is only the quiet, steady rhythm of a mother's watch. The children are safe. The nursery is still. And the night is your own. The air over Paris is growing heavy, thick with the smell of damp smoke and the cold, metallic taste of iron. As the winter of 1788 turns into the spring of 1789, a different kind of rhythm begins to beat through the heart of France. It is not the rhythmic music of a ballroom, but the steady, hollow thumping of empty stomachs. We are moving away from the golden isolation of Versailles and into the narrow, dark streets of the city where the boring and essential price of a single loaf of bread has become the most dangerous number in the world. Let your mind settle into the cold stillness of a Parisian morning. Imagine a long line of people standing in the shadows of a stone bakery, their breath visible in the freezing air, waiting for a sound that does not come. The rhythmic opening of the wooden shutters. Clack, creak, clack. But the shutters remain closed. There is no flour. There is no bread. In Versailles, Antonia sits at her breakfast table. The porcelain is white, the silver is polished, and the boring details of the state's finances are being laid out before her. But there is a disconnect. A vast, silent ocean between the palace and the people. The rumor mill is turning faster than any grain mill in the country. It is here, in the middle of this hunger, that the most famous lie in history begins to take root. Let them eat cake. Close your eyes and listen to the silence of that sentence. Antonia never said it. The phrase had appeared in books years before she even arrived in France, attributed to other princesses, other eras. But the people of Paris, looking for a face to blame for their suffering, chose her. To a woman standing in the rain, her children crying for food, it was easy to believe that the Austrian woman in her silk gowns and her diamond necklaces was mocking them. The boring reality that the country was bankrupt from wars and bad harvests was too complex to hate. But a queen who supposedly suggested cake when there was no bread, that was a target. The rumors were like a slow, rhythmic poison. Every day, new pamphlets were printed in the dark basements of Paris. The sound of the printing presses, thump, roll, was the heartbeat of the coming revolution. They called her Madame Deficit. They claimed she spent the nation's bread money on her gardens and her gambling. Antonia was becoming a ghost in her own kingdom, a monster created by the imagination of a starving people. Think of the boring and repetitive meetings of the King's Council. Louis sits at the head of the table, his brow furrowed, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of the wood. Tap, tap, tap. He wants to help, but he is paralyzed by the system he inherited. He orders grain to be brought in, he tries to lower taxes, but the machinery of the state is broken. Antonia begins to feel the shift in the atmosphere. When she travels to Paris, the crowds no longer cheer. There is a new, heavy silence in the streets. People do not take off their hats. They do not bow. They simply watch her carriage pass by, their eyes cold and unblinking. The rhythmic sound of the horse's hoofs, clop clop, clop clop, feels like it is echoing in a tomb. She retreats further into Versailles. But even the palace walls feel thinner now. The boring and beautiful routine of the nursery is her only shield. She spends her evenings reading to her children, the soft, rhythmic sound of her voice trying to drown out the noise of the world outside. But she knows. She sees the worry on the faces of her guards. She sees the way the servants are starting to whisper in the corners of the hallways. The summer of 1789 arrives with a heat that feels like a threat. The grain riots are no longer small, isolated events. They are becoming a wave. In the markets, women are seizing bread wagons. The sound of their wooden shoes on the cobblestones, clack 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 clack, is becoming a march. They are not just asking for food anymore, they are asking for justice. And still, the rumors grow. They say she is hiding grain in the cellars of Versailles. They say she is plotting to blow up the city of Paris. The boring truth, that she was a grieving mother trying to navigate a crisis she didn't understand, was lost in the noise. History was being rewritten in the streets, and she was being cast as the villain. Think of the nights in the palace now. The candles burn low, and the shadows are long. Antonia lies awake, listening to the wind. In the distance, she can hear the bells of the city ringing. Dong, dong, dong. Not for a celebration, but for an alarm. The rhythm of her life has changed from a waltz to a drumbeat. She looks at her silk dresses, her porcelain cups, her golden clocks. They all look different now. They look like evidence. The boring luxury of her past has become her greatest burden. She begins to realize that she is trapped in a dream that has turned into a nightmare, and there is no way to wake up. As you listen to the steady, rhythmic breathing of the night, let yourself feel the tension of this moment. The gap between the palace and the street is closing. The hunger of the many is about to overwhelm the luxury of the few. The world is holding its breath. Sleep now, as the fires in the Paris streets burn through the night. The bakeries are empty. The pamphlets are being distributed. And the Queen of France is sitting in the dark, listening to the sound of a world that is about to break. Rest in the stillness, away from the anger and the rumors. The night is a neutral ground, a place where the hungry and the powerful both find sleep. The story moves toward the gates of the palace, toward the moment when the people and the queen will finally meet, face to face. The silence is deep. The stars are cold. And the story continues, as the shadows grow longer, and the bread runs out. The night of October 5th, 1789, is a night that smells of rain, damp wool, and the sharp, metallic scent of cold iron. We are standing at the very edge of the end of Versailles. The boring and repetitive luxury of the palace is about to be shattered by a sound that the kings of France never thought they would hear. It is the sound of thousands of feet, marching through the mud and the dark, coming from Paris. Not soldiers, but women. Mothers, sisters, and wives who have reached the absolute end of their patience. The air is heavy, the clouds are low and gray, and the rhythmic falling of the rain against the palace windows, patter, splash, patter, splash, is the only warning of the storm that is about to break the gates. Let yourself settle into the deep, uneasy stillness of the palace at midnight. The hallways are long and dimly lit, the candles flickering in the draught, casting long, dancing shadows of the marble statues against the gold-leafed walls. In her private chambers, Antonia is trying to find sleep. But the boring and steady comfort of her bed feels different tonight. The sheets are cold. Outside, the gardens she loved, the Trianon, the hamlet, are shrouded in a thick, ghostly mist. She does not know that at this very moment, 7,000 women are standing outside the golden fences of the palace. They are soaked to the bone, their clothes heavy with the mire of the road, their faces illuminated by the orange glow of torches that hiss in the rain. Hiss, crackle, hiss. They are not whispering anymore. They are chanting. Bread. The Queen. Versailles. The sound of the crowd is a low, rhythmic growl, like the distant sound of the sea before a hurricane. Inside, the courtiers are frozen in fear. The boring etiquette of the court is useless now. No one knows who is in charge. Louis, the silent king, has returned from a day of hunting. He sits in his study, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of his desk, tap, 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 staring at a map of Paris that no longer makes sense. He does not want to fire on his people. He waits. He hopes the night will pass. But the night does not pass. It only grows darker. Around 6 in the morning, the silence of the palace is broken by a sudden, sharp, and terrifying noise. The sound of a gate being forced open. Creak, bang, crash. One of the secret entrances has been left unguarded. The crowd pours in. Imagine the sound of thousands of wooden shoes running across the marble floors of the Grand Gallery. Clack, 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 clack. It is a frantic, chaotic rhythm that sounds like the heartbeat of a dying empire. The guards at the Queen's door are overwhelmed. "Save the Queen," one of them shouts before he is struck down. Antonia is woken by the sound of screaming and the rhythmic thumping of axes against wood. Thud, crack, thud. She has only seconds. She runs from her bed, her feet bare on the cold, hard floors. She does not have her silk gowns, she does not have her diamonds. She is just a woman in a thin nightdress, running through the secret passages that lead to the king's apartments. Think of the boring but terrifying details of that flight. The smell of the damp stone in the hidden corridors. The way her breath comes in quick, shallow bursts. The rhythmic flickering of the single candle she carries, its light barely touching the edges of the dark. Behind her, she can hear the voices of the women entering her bedroom, the sound of her bed being shredded by bayonets. They are looking for the Austrian woman, but she is gone into the shadows. She reaches the king's room. The heavy oak door is locked from the inside. She pounds on it, her fists making a soft, desperate sound against the wood. Thump, thump, thump. Finally, it opens. She and Louis are together, along with their children. They stand in the center of the room, surrounded by the few guards who remain. The palace is no longer a home, it is a fortress under siege. As the sun begins to rise over the rain-soaked courtyard, the crowd demands to see the queen. They want her to face them on the balcony. Imagine the courage it takes to step out of the shadows and into the light of 7,000 angry eyes. Antonia steps onto the balcony of the marble court. The air is cold, and she can feel the mist on her skin. Below her, a sea of pikes and bayonets. The crowd is silent for a moment, stunned by her presence. She bows. A slow, rhythmic, and graceful bow, just as she had been taught in the boring lessons of her youth in Vienna. For a heartbeat, the anger turns to respect. "Long live the queen," someone shouts. But the truce is fragile. The crowd has one final demand. To Paris. They want the king and the queen to leave Versailles forever, to live among the people in the city. The boring and repetitive life of the palace ends in that moment. The decision is made. The carriages are brought out. The packing is frantic, a chaotic version of the boring inventories we saw before. Clothes are stuffed into trunks, jewels are hidden in pockets, the golden clocks are left behind, their rhythmic ticking continuing in empty rooms that will never be filled again. The journey to Paris is a long, slow, and agonizing procession. It takes 9 hours to travel 12 miles. The carriage is surrounded by the crowd. They carry the heads of the palace guards on pikes. Their faces pale and frozen in the gray light. They shout, they sing, they beat on the sides of the carriage with their fists. Bang, bang, bang. Antonia sits inside, her back straight, her eyes fixed on her children. She is watching the world she built, the gardens of Trianon, the hamlet, the mirrors, disappear into the distance. The sound of the carriage wheels on the muddy road is a slow, heavy rhythm. Squish, roll, squish, roll. Every turn of the wheel is a step away from her divinity, and a step toward her humanity. She is no longer the Sun Queen. She is a prisoner of the people. They reach Paris in the dark. The city is a labyrinth of narrow streets and flickering torches. They are taken to the Tuileries Palace, an old, dusty, and neglected building that has not been lived in for 100 years. The air inside is stale, smelling of damp stone and ancient dust. There are no curtains, no fires, no beds ready for them. Antonia walks through the dark rooms. Her silk shoes are ruined by the mud. Her hair is tangled. She looks at the bare walls, the empty fireplaces. The boring luxury of Versailles feels like a dream from another life. Here, in the heart of the revolution, the only sound is the rhythmic, heavy breathing of the crowd outside the gates. They are not going away. They are staying to watch their king and queen. Think of her on that first night in the Tuileries. She sits on a hard, wooden chair, the only furniture in the room. She holds her son on her lap. The boring ticking of a clock is missing. Instead, there is the sound of the city, the distant shouting, the barking of dogs, the rhythmic, steady march of the National Guard under her window. Stomp, 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 stomp. She is tired, more tired than she has ever been in her life. But she does not cry. She has learned that the mask is not just for the court, it is for survival. She looks at the moon through a window that has no glass, a silver sliver in the dark sky. It is the same moon that shone over Vienna, the same moon that shone over the Trianon. It is the only thing that remains the same. As you listen to the stillness of this first night in Paris, let yourself feel the weight of what has been lost. The golden era is over. The boring and beautiful rituals of Versailles have been replaced by the cold, hard reality of a revolution. The palace is empty, the gardens are silent, and the Queen of France is a captive in her own capital. Sleep now, as the fires in Paris burn low. The crowd is settling into the shadows. The Tuileries is a house of ghosts, and the night is deep. Rest in the knowledge that even when the world is turned upside down, the stars do not move. The story is turning toward a darker path, but for tonight, there is only the quiet, heavy breathing of a family trying to find peace in the dark. The road is long. The rain has stopped. And the night is your own. The Tuileries Palace stands in the heart of Paris like a forgotten giant made of gray stone and heavy shadows. As the autumn of 1789 turns into the long, cold winter of 1790, the rhythmic pulse of royal life has shifted from the golden galleries of Versailles to these dusty, drafty rooms. We are entering the period of captivity, a time when the boring and repetitive acts of daily life became a form of survival. Imagine the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the ancient windows, a low, mourning sound that never seems to stop. Who? Who? This is no longer a palace of pleasure, it is a palace of mirrors where every reflection is a prisoner. Let your mind settle into the heavy, still air of these abandoned hallways. The floorboards creak with a slow, rhythmic groan under every step, creak, snap, creak, as if the building itself is complaining about the weight of its new inhabitants. In Versailles, Antonia had miles of gardens to walk in. Here, in the Tuileries, her world has shrunk to a few stone rooms and a small, fenced garden that is always surrounded by a wall of people. The boring and beautiful privacy of the Trianon is gone forever. Now, even when she sleeps, she can hear the rhythmic, steady breathing of the National Guard outside her door. They are not there to protect her, they are there to watch her. Imagine Antonia waking up in her new bedchamber. The walls are bare, the tapestries are faded, and the air smells of old dust and damp chimneys. There is no grand levee here. The ritual has been stripped down to its boring and basic elements. She dresses herself with the help of a few loyal ladies, their movements quiet and frantic. The rustle of her silk dress, shoo, 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 sounds too loud in the empty room. She no longer wears the towering poofs or the diamonds of the fashion revolution. She wears simple, dark clothes, a mourning dress for a life that hasn't officially ended yet. She spends her mornings teaching her children. This boring and repetitive task is her only anchor. Picture her sitting at a small, scarred wooden table with the young Dauphin, Louis Charles. The sound of his quill scratching against the paper, scritch, scratch, scritch, is the heartbeat of her morning. She teaches him history, geography, and the languages of the empires she once knew. She is trying to build a world inside his head, because the world outside the window is too dangerous. Louis, the silent king, has changed the most. He no longer has his hunting forests. He no longer has his workshop of locks. He spends his days sitting by the window, watching the people in the street. He reads endlessly, his fingers turning the pages with a slow, rhythmic flip, flip. He is a ghost in a suit of clothes, a man who has lost his purpose and is waiting for the world to tell him what to do. Antonia watches him, her heart a mixture of love and a cold, sharp frustration. She is the one who tries to keep the boring machinery of the family moving. She is the one who writes the secret letters, the ink drying slowly on the page in the dim candlelight. The sound of the Tuileries at night is a collection of whispers. Every servant is a potential spy. Every shadow could be an assassin. The boring acts of eating and talking have become a strategic game. They speak in codes. They hide notes in the lining of their clothes. The rhythmic ticking of the palace clocks, tick, tock, tick, no longer feels like the passage of time, it feels like the counting down of a fuse. Antonia walks in the small garden of the Tuileries for an hour every afternoon. It is a boring and painful ritual. She has to walk behind a row of iron railings, while the people of Paris stand on the other side and watch her. They shout insults. They hiss like snakes. SSS. 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 She keeps her back straight. She keeps her eyes fixed on the path ahead. She has learned that her dignity is the only wall she has left. The sound of her feet on the gravel, crunch, 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 is the only thing she allows herself to hear. Sometimes, a person in the crowd will throw a flower, or they will offer a small, silent nod of respect. These tiny, boring moments of kindness are what keep her from breaking. She tucks the memory of them away, like a jewel in a box. The isolation of the Tuileries is a psychological weight that never lifts. The palace is surrounded by the city, but it feels like it is on a desert island. Antonia receives letters from her sister in Naples, from her family in Vienna. They tell her to be brave. They tell her to wait. But waiting is the hardest, boring work of all. Waiting for a rescue that never comes. Waiting for a mob that never leaves. Think of the evenings in the Tuileries. The family sits together in a small salon. The fire in the hearth is small, the wood damp and hissing. Antonia sews. The rhythmic push, pull, push of the needle through the fabric is the only sound. Lewis reads aloud from a history of England. The children play quietly on the floor with a set of wooden soldiers. From the outside, it looks like a boring middle-class evening. But inside, every one of them is listening to the noise from the street. The singing of the revolutionary songs, the rhythmic beating of the drums, the occasional, sharp crack of a distant musket. The darkness in the Tuileries is deep. Because they are short on money, they use fewer candles. The rooms are filled with boring and heavy shadows that seem to move when you are not looking. Antonia lies awake in the dark, her eyes open, listening to the city breathe. Paris is a living thing, a beast that is trapped outside her door. She can hear the rhythmic, distant bells of the churches. Dong, dong, dong. They sound like a warning. They sound like a funeral. She thinks of the hall of mirrors. She thinks of the scent of the orange trees at Trianon. She thinks of the way the sun used to hit the gold leaf on the ceilings of Versailles. Those things are not just gone, they feel like they happened to a different person. A girl she used to know. A girl who died on the road from Versailles to Paris. Now, she is a mother. She is a wife. She is a prisoner. The boring reality of her life has become her only truth. She finds a strange, quiet strength in the repetition. The waking, the teaching, the walking, the sewing, the sleeping. If she can keep the rhythm, she can keep her mind. As you listen to the stillness of this captive palace, let yourself feel the weight of the air. It is thick with history, thick with the dreams of people who are no longer there. The Tuileries is a place of ghosts, and Antonia is the most beautiful ghost of all. Sleep now, as the guards outside change their shift. The sound of their boots on the stone, stomp, 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 is a rhythmic reminder that the world is still watching. But inside the room, it is quiet. The needle is put away. The book is closed. The candles are blown out, the smoke curling into the cold, gray air. Rest in the knowledge that even in a cage, the soul can find a way to be still. The night is deep, and the city is finally quiet. The story is moving toward a desperate plan, a flight into the dark, but for tonight, there is only the rhythmic breathing of a queen who is learning to survive on nothing but her own courage. The night of June 20th, 1791, is a night of shadows, muffled footsteps, and the rhythmic, pounding heartbeat of a family in hiding. We are standing in the dark corridors of the Tuileries Palace, where the very air seems to hold its breath. This is the beginning of the end. The flight to Varennes. A desperate, boring, and meticulously planned escape that was supposed to lead to freedom, but instead led to the final sunset of the monarchy. Imagine the sound of a key turning slowly in a rusted lock, creak, click, a sound that feels as loud as a gunshot in the dead of night. The king and queen are no longer captives tonight. They are fugitives. Let your mind settle into the deep, heavy silence of the midnight streets of Paris. The cobblestones are damp, reflecting the pale, silver light of a moon that is half hidden by clouds. The plan is a masterpiece of boring and dangerous details. 4 months. Antonia has been organizing this in secret. Every letter sent in code, every gold coin hidden in a trunk, every disguise sewn by candlelight. To the world, she was the broken prisoner of the Tuileries. But in the dark, she was the architect of a miracle. Imagine her now, stepping out of the palace side door. She is not dressed in silk or lace. She wears a simple, gray traveling dress and a plain bonnet that shadows her face. She is playing the role of a governess. She walks across the courtyard, her footsteps a soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap on the stone. She has to pass right by the National Guardsmen. She can smell the tobacco from their pipes, hear the rhythmic, low murmur of their voices as they talk about the day's politics. She bows her head, her breath coming in slow, deliberate counts. 1, 2, 3. She passes them. The shadows swallow her whole. At a quiet corner near the Rue de l'Echelle, a heavy, dark carriage is waiting. It is a berlin, a massive, boring vehicle built for long journeys. One by one, the family arrives in disguise. The king, dressed as a valet in a plain brown coat. The children, woken from their sleep and told it is a game. The sound of the carriage door closing, thud, is the first note of their new life. The carriage begins to move. The rhythmic clatter of the iron wheels on the Paris streets, clack clack, clack clack, sounds like a drumbeat in Antonia's ears. They are leaving the city behind. They are passing the gates. The guards are sleepy, their eyes heavy in the pre-dawn light. They look at the passports. Boring pieces of paper with false names. And then, the gate opens. The road to the border lies ahead. As the sun begins to rise over the French countryside, the atmosphere inside the carriage changes. The boring tension of the city begins to lift. Antonia looks out the window at the green fields, the haystacks, the quiet, stone villages. It is the first time she has seen the open sky in 2 years. The air coming through the window smells of clover and fresh rain. Louis, the silent king, begins to relax. He checks his watch. He looks at his maps. He is no longer a prisoner, he is a traveler. But the boring reality of their escape is its own enemy. The Berlin carriage is too heavy, too slow. It moves with a rhythmic, swaying motion that is comfortable, but deadly. They are behind schedule. At every post house where they stop to change horses, the delays grow. The sound of the horses being unharnessed, jingle, stomp, jingle, takes too long. The sun is too bright. The world is too awake. Antonia watches the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Every minute lost is a mile closer to capture. She sees the people at the post houses looking at them. They are looking at the massive, expensive carriage. They are looking at the valet who looks strangely like the face on the coins in their pockets. At a place called St. Menehould, the rhythm of their luck breaks. A postmaster named Drouet looks into the carriage. He sees the queen. He sees the man in the brown coat. He looks at a 5-livre note in his hand. The resemblance is undeniable. He does not say a word. He simply watches as the carriage pulls away, its wheels making a slow, rhythmic crunch, crunch, on the gravel. Then, he jumps on his horse and rides into the night. The carriage reaches the small town of Varennes late at night. The streets are dark. The air is cold. The horses are tired, their breathing heavy and rhythmic in the silence. Huff, blow, huff, blow. They are waiting for the military escort that was supposed to meet them. But the escort is not there. The town is quiet, but it is a waiting silence. Then, the sound of a bell. The tocsin. Dong, dong, dong. A frantic, rhythmic alarm that shatters the night. People begin to pour out of their houses, carrying lanterns and muskets. The carriage is stopped at a small bridge. Passports, a voice shouts. They are taken into a small, boring house belonging to a grocer named Sauce. Imagine the scene. The Queen of France sitting on a wooden bench in a room that smells of tallow candles and dried herbs. The children are asleep on a pile of old blankets in the corner. Louis is standing by the window, watching the crowd grow in the street outside. For hours, the boring and agonizing negotiation continues. Louis tries to appeal to their loyalty. Antonia sits in silence, her back straight, her eyes fixed on a single, flickering candle. But the revolution is stronger than the king's voice. The messengers from Paris arrive. They carry a decree from the National Assembly. The boring and legal words that mean the end of their flight. The king is to be brought back to the capital. Antonia stands up. She looks at the men in the room. She sees their muddy boots, their rough hands, their cold eyes. She realizes that the world of Versailles, the world of the Trianon, is gone forever. It was a dream that ended on a bridge in Varennes. The return journey to Paris is a slow, rhythmic funeral. 3 days in the heat and the dust. The carriage is now a cage. 2 deputies from the assembly sit inside with them, their presence a boring and constant reminder of their fall. Outside, the crowd is no longer silent. They scream. They spit. They beat on the carriage walls. Bang, thud, bang. The dust fills the carriage, coating Antonia's gray dress, settling in her hair, making her look like a ghost made of ash. She watches the countryside pass by, but it no longer looks beautiful. It looks like a prison without walls. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels, clack clack, clack clack, now sounds like a countdown. They are going back to the Tuileries. They are going back to the grey stone and the heavy shadows. But this time, there will be no secret doors. There will be no more games. Think of her as the carriage enters the gates of Paris. The crowd is huge, and for the first time, they are perfectly, terrifyingly silent. No one takes off their hat. No one speaks. The only sound is the rhythmic, heavy breathing of thousands of people, and the slow, grinding of the carriage wheels. Antonia looks out the window. She sees the Tuileries palace waiting for her, its windows dark like empty eye sockets. She knows that she is walking into a tomb. But she does not bow her head. She keeps her mask on even if the paint is cracked and the silk is stained with dust. As you listen to the stillness of this failed escape, let yourself feel the weight of that return. The moment when hope was extinguished like a candle in a draught. The road to Varennes was a road to a different life, but it only led back to the same stone walls. Sleep now, as the carriage is locked behind the palace gates once again. The horses are led away, their hoofs making a final, rhythmic sound on the courtyard stone. Antonia is back in her room, sitting on her bed, watching the moon rise over the rooftops of Paris. It is the same moon, but the world beneath it has changed forever. Rest in the silence. The shadows are long, and the night is deep. The story is turning toward the final storm, but for tonight, there is only the quiet, steady rhythm of a heart that has lost everything but its pride. The dust has settled. The doors are barred. And the night is your own. The world of gold and mirrors has finally dissolved into a world of cold stone and damp shadows. We have traveled far from the sunlit gardens of Versailles, and we find ourselves now in the deepest, darkest heart of Paris, within the thick, weeping walls of the conciergerie. This is no longer a palace. It is the antechamber of the guillotine. And the woman who was once the Queen of France is no longer called Marie Antoinette. She is now simply prisoner number 280. Imagine the sound of a heavy, iron door swinging shut on its rusted hinges, creak, slam, a sound that echoes through the narrow, stone corridors like the closing of a tomb. Let your mind settle into the cold, heavy stillness of this underground world. The air here is thick, smelling of river mud, stale straw, and the faint, metallic scent of iron. Antonia's new world is a small, rectangular cell, deep beneath the level of the street. The walls are made of rough, uneven stones that are always damp to the touch. Drip, drip, drip. The rhythm of the water leaking from the ceiling is the only clock she has now. There is no silk here. No velvet curtains to block out the world. Only a simple, boring wooden cot with a straw mattress that smells of rot, a small table, and 2 chairs. Think of the boring and repetitive routine of a prisoner. Every morning, she is woken not by the soft rustle of a lady-in-waiting's dress, but by the sharp, rhythmic clinking of a turnkey's keys. Jingle, clink, jingle. The heavy bolt is thrown back, and a soldier enters. According to the new, cruel rules of the revolution, she is never to be alone. A screen is placed in the corner of the cell, and behind it, 2 gendarmes watch her every move, 24 hours a day. Imagine the loss of the last, boring luxury she had, privacy. She must dress behind the screen, she must sleep under their watchful eyes, she must pray while they smoke their pipes and laugh in the corner. The rhythmic, low murmur of their voices is a constant reminder that she is no longer a person, she is a piece of property belonging to the Republic. Antonia has changed physically. The fashion revolution is a distant, impossible dream. Her hair, which was once powdered and piled high with silk ships and flowers, is now thin, gray, and cut short. She wears a simple, black morning dress, the fabric worn thin at the elbows and knees. She is 37 years old, but in the dim, gray light of the cell, she looks like a woman of 60. But her eyes, they are still the eyes of an archduchess. They are steady, clear, and filled with a quiet, boring kind of courage that the prison walls cannot break. She spends her days in a state of rhythmic, meditative stillness. She sits on her chair, her back as straight as it was on the throne of France. She has no books to read, no music to play, no children to teach. Her children have been taken from her. This is the greatest loss of all, a silence in her heart that is louder than the city outside. To pass the time, she does the only boring work she is allowed. She sews. She takes threads from the old tapestries on the wall and mends her worn clothes. Push, pull, push, pull. The rhythmic motion of the needle is her only prayer. Or she knits, using 2 small pieces of wood she found on the floor. The soft, rhythmic click, click, click of the wood is the only music in the cell. The sound of the conciergerie at night is a collection of terrors. The distant shouting of other prisoners, the rhythmic, heavy footsteps of the guards on the stone stairs, stomp, 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 and the sound of the carts, the tumbrils, rattling over the cobblestones outside. Rumble, clatter, rumble. Every night, she listens to the names being called out. Every night, she wonders if her name will be next. She thinks of the Trianon. She closes her eyes and tries to remember the smell of the jasmine in the evening air. She tries to hear the sound of the fountains, the soft, rhythmic splash of the water. But the dampness of the cell always pulls her back. She touches the stone wall, and it is cold. She listens to the river Seine flowing just outside the foundations, a heavy, rushing sound that never stops. The boring details of her health are also failing. She is weak, she is losing weight, and she is in constant pain. But she refuses to complain. When the guards offer her better food, she refuses. When they mock her, she remains silent. She has learned that the only power she has left is the power to endure. The rhythmic, steady beat of her heart is her only rebellion. In the quiet hours before dawn, when even the guards are dozing in their chairs, Antonia prays. She does not pray for a miracle. She does not pray for a rescue. She prays for the strength to face the end with dignity. She thinks of her mother in Vienna. She thinks of her husband who is already gone. She feels the weight of the long, boring history of her family, the Habsburgs and the Bourbons, pressing down on her shoulders. She will not be the one to let them down. Think of her sitting at the small table, writing her final letter by the light of a single, sputtering candle. The paper is rough, the ink is thin. Her hand is steady. The scratch of the quill, scritch, scratch, scritch, is the only sound in the cell. She writes to her sister-in-law, asking her to take care of her children. "I am calm," she writes, "as one is when the conscience is clear." The boring and simple words are the last testament of a queen. The candle flickers and dies. The room is plunged into a thick, velvety darkness. Antonia does not move. She sits in the dark, listening to the rhythm of her own breathing. In, out, in, out. It is the only thing she owns now. As you listen to the stillness of this prison cell, let yourself feel the weight of that silence. The world of Versailles is a ghost. The world of the Tuileries is a dream. There is only the stone, the damp, and the dark. But even here, in the lowest place in France, there is a spark of something that cannot be extinguished. Sleep now, as the first light of the morning begins to gray the edges of the cell window. The turnkey is coming. The keys are jingling. The final day is approaching. But for this moment, there is only the quiet. The needle is still. The prayer is finished. Rest in the knowledge that courage is not the absence of fear, but the boring and steady decision to keep moving forward. The night is over, and the gray light is here. The story is turning toward its final, rhythmic conclusion, but for tonight, there is only the peace of a prisoner who has found her soul in the dark. The air in the courtroom of the Revolutionary Tribunal is heavy, cold, and thick with the scent of damp wool and old, dusty floorboards. We are in October 1793, and the world that once belonged to Marie Antoinette has narrowed down to a single, high-backed wooden chair in a room filled with enemies. She is no longer the queen. To the men sitting in judgment, she is the widow Capet. Imagine the sound of a heavy, iron-tipped staff striking the floor, thump, 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 a rhythmic call for silence that echoes against the high, gray ceilings. This is not a trial seeking truth, it is a ritual designed to justify an ending. But as the hours turn into days, the boring and repetitive questions of the prosecutors are met with something they did not expect. A quiet, unshakable dignity. Let your mind drift into the stillness of that crowded room. Feel the weight of the hundreds of eyes fixed on the woman in the black mourning dress. Antonia sits perfectly still. Her back does not touch the chair. Her hands, once adorned with the finest diamonds of Europe, now rest quietly in her lap, their fingers slightly pale, but steady. She has been awake for days, moving from the damp cell of the conciergerie to the harsh light of the court. The boring and mechanical process of the law begins. The clerk reads the indictment, a long, rhythmic list of crimes that sounds like the tolling of a heavy bell. Treason, conspiracy, depleting the national treasury. The words fall into the silence of the room like stones into a well. Imagine the prosecutors. They speak with a frantic, rhythmic energy, trying to break her. They bring up the fashion revolution. They bring up the diamond necklace. They bring up her letters to her family in Austria. Every boring detail of her life is twisted into a weapon. But Antonia does not flinch. When she speaks, her voice is low, clear, and rhythmic, a calm melody in a sea of noise. I was a queen, she says, and you took away my crown. I was a wife, and you took away my husband. I was a mother, and you took away my children. I have nothing left but my blood, and you may take that whenever you wish. The trial stretches deep into the night. The candles in the courtroom begin to sputter and die, their smoke curling upward in thin, rhythmic spirals. The boring and exhausting nature of the interrogation continues. The prosecutor, Hébert, desperate to turn the people against her forever, brings forward the ultimate lie. A dark, impossible accusation involving her own son. The room goes silent. Even the most radical revolutionaries hold their breath. Antonia does not answer at first. She remains as still as a statue. The only sound is the rhythmic ticking of a clock on the wall, tick, tock, tick. Then, she stands up. She looks not at the judges, but at the women in the audience, the mothers of Paris who had come to watch her fall. I appeal to all mothers here, she says, her voice trembling just enough to be felt. Is there one among you who could believe such a thing? In that boring and human moment, the power in the room shifts. The women, who had come to hiss and mock, fall silent. Some of them bow their heads. The rhythmic, low murmur of the crowd is no longer a growl, it is a sigh. For a heartbeat, she is not a symbol of the old regime, she is a mother in pain. But the machinery of the revolution does not stop for a heartbeat. The trial continues until 4 in the morning. The boring and technical deliberations of the jury are quick. The verdict is a foregone conclusion. Antonia is led out of the room while they decide. Think of her walking back through the dark corridors, the sound of her heels on the stone, tap, tap, tap. She is so tired that the world feels like a dream made of gray mist. When she is brought back, the room is cold with the pre-dawn air. The judge reads the sentence. Death. Within 24 hours. Antonia listens to the words with a rhythmic, steady breathing. She does not cry out. She does not plead. She bows her head slightly to the court, a final, boring act of etiquette that she learned in the palaces of Vienna 20 years ago. She turns and walks away, her black dress rustling softly against the floor. Shh, shh, shh. The soldiers surround her, their bayonets reflecting the first, pale gray light of the morning. Back in her cell at the conciergerie, the boring reality of the end begins. She has only a few hours. She asks for ink and paper. Imagine her sitting at the small, rough table, the same table where we saw her before. The quill scratches against the paper, scritch, scratch, scritch, a rhythmic, desperate sound in the silence. She writes her final letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. She speaks of her children. She speaks of forgiveness. I forgive my enemies, she writes, as I hope God will forgive me. She cuts off a lock of her hair, now entirely white from the stress of the last year. She wraps it in a piece of paper. These are the boring legacies of a queen. A few words of ink, a lock of hair, a prayer whispered into the damp stone of a prison. Think of her now, as the sun begins to rise over the roofs of Paris. The city is waking up. The rhythmic sound of the drums begins in the distance, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat. It is the sound of the executioner's approach. Antonia stands by the small, barred window. She can see a sliver of the sky, turning from gray to a soft, pale blue. It is a boring and beautiful morning. The same kind of morning she used to see from the windows of Trianon. She washes herself for the last time. The water is cold and clear. She puts on a simple white dress, the color of mourning for the queens of France. She ties a white cap over her short hair. She is ready. The mask is complete. Not the mask of a fashion icon, but the mask of a woman who has found peace in the middle of a storm. The turnkey arrives. The keys clink. Jingle, clack, jingle. The iron door opens. Antonia steps out of her cell. She walks past the guards, past the other prisoners who watch her in a heavy, rhythmic silence. She is no longer prisoner 280. She is no longer the widow Capet. In this final hour, she is Marie Antoinette again. As you listen to the steady, rhythmic pulse of this final day, let yourself feel the weight of her courage. The courtroom was a place of noise and lies, but the cell is a place of truth. The trial is over. The sentence is set. And the night is fading into a day that will never end for her. Sleep now, as the drums in the distance grow louder. The city is moving, but the queen is still. The boring tasks of life have all been finished. The letter is folded. The prayer is said. The white dress is clean. Rest in the stillness of the dawn. The stars have vanished, but the light is steady. The story is turning toward the very last step, the final walk, but for tonight, there is only the quiet, rhythmic breathing of a woman who has looked into the dark and did not blink. The stone is cold. The sky is pale. And the night is your own. The final morning has arrived, a cold, pale gray dawn that breaks over the rooftops of Paris like a slow intake of breath. We are in the last hours of October 16th, 1793. The grand waltz that began in the halls of Vienna and spun through the gold-leafed galleries of Versailles is coming to its final, rhythmic stop. In the conciergerie prison, the air is thin and frozen, smelling of the damp river and the smoke of guttering candles. Antonia stands in the center of her cell, a white silhouette in the gloom. Every boring and mechanical preparation for the end is now in motion. The ritual of the crown is being replaced by the ritual of the scaffold. Let your breath slow down for this final walk. Feel the weight of the silence in the stone corridors, a silence that is about to be broken by the drums of history. Antonia is dressing. She has chosen white, the color worn by the widowed queens of France. The fabric is simple, a plain muslin dress that she has kept clean despite the dampness of her cell. Her hands move with a slow, rhythmic precision as she pins her white cap. There is no jewelry now. No diamonds to catch the light. Only the quiet, steady dignity of a woman who has already said her goodbyes to the world. Then, the sound of the door. Clack, creak. It is not a guard, but the executioner. Henri Sanson. He enters the cell with a boring and professional efficiency. He asks her to sit. He takes out a pair of large, cold steel scissors. Antonia remains as still as a statue as he begins to cut her hair. Snip, snip, snip. The gray-white locks fall to the stone floor like winter leaves. This hair was once the talk of Europe, and now it is gathered up and cast aside like straw. Then, the binding of her hands. He pulls her arms behind her back, the rough hemp rope biting into her wrists. The sound of the knot being tightened is a short, sharp pull. Zzip, tug. Antonia winces for a heartbeat, then straightens her back once more. She is ready. She is led out of the cell for the last time. Her footsteps on the stone are soft, almost silent, tap, 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 while the heavy boots of the guards create a rhythmic, thunderous accompaniment. Stomp, stomp, stomp. She does not look back. She walks toward the courtyard where the cart, the tumbrel, is waiting. Unlike the king, who was given a closed carriage, Antonia is to be taken in an open cart, like a common criminal. Think of the boring and agonizing pace of that final journey. The cart is made of rough wood, its wheels high and unstable. Rumble, clatter, rumble. Antonia is forced to sit on a hard board, her hands tied, her back exposed to the eyes of thousands. The procession moves through the streets of Paris, a slow, rhythmic crawl that takes over an hour. The crowds are a wall of noise. They shout, they laugh, they throw insults like stones. But Antonia does not hear them. She keeps her eyes fixed on the distance, perhaps seeing the gardens of Schönbrunn, perhaps seeing the face of her children. Her face is a mask of iron. Even the painter David, standing in the crowd, is struck by her posture. He sketches her in a few quick, rhythmic lines, a woman of stone in a world of fire. The cart reaches the Place de la Revolution. The sun is higher now, a cold, bright eye in the sky. The guillotine stands in the center of the square, a tall, dark frame made of wood and steel. The blade catches the light, a sharp, silver glint that promises a sudden, rhythmic end. Antonia descends from the cart. She walks toward the steps of the scaffold. She accidentally steps on the executioner's foot. In her final, boring act of royal grace, she whispers, "Monsieur, I ask your pardon. I did not do it on purpose." Even at the very edge of the abyss, she is Antonia of Austria. She climbs the steps. The sound of the wind in the square is a low, mourning whistle. Who? Shh! Who? She looks out at the sea of people for one last time. She sees the Tuileries palace in the distance. She looks at the sky. And then, she is placed on the plank. The final sounds are mechanical. The sliding of the wooden collar, clack. The release of the lever, click. And then, the rhythmic, heavy fall of the blade. Shh! Thump! The silence that follows is not the silence of the court, it is the silence of history. The Queen is gone. The era of the Bourbons is over. The white dress is stained, and the story has reached its final, quiet stop. A final reflection, the lesson of the Queen. As we leave Marie Antoinette in the long, fading shadows of the 18th century, we are left with more than just a story of a downfall. We are left with a mirror to our own lives. If we look closely at this boring and tragic history, we find a profound lesson in the nature of human perception. Antonia was a woman who was never truly seen for who she was, only for what she represented. She teaches us how easily a person can be lost behind a mask of rumors, and how quickly a nation's hunger can turn into a thirst for blood. But perhaps the most beautiful lesson is the one she found in the dark. Her life teaches us that when everything is stripped away, the gold, the titles, the diamonds, and even the children, what remains is the soul. She found her greatest strength not in the height of her poof hair, but in the depth of her silence. She showed us that even when we are captives of our circumstances, we can still be masters of our own dignity. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think of the weight you are carrying. The modern world has its own palaces and its own mobs, its own pressures and its own noise. But like the Queen in her cell at the conciergerie, you have a choice. You can choose to be still. You can choose to find peace in the boring and simple rhythm of your own breath. Let go of the need to be seen. Let go of the crowns you are trying to hold on to. The glory of the world is like the hair powder of Versailles. It is beautiful for a moment, and then it is swept away by the wind. What matters is the quiet, steady heart that remains when the lights go out. Sleep now, as the drums of Paris fade into the distance. The palaces are empty. The gardens are still. The Queen is at rest, and you are safe in the quiet of the present. The story is finished, but the peace you have found is just beginning. The moon is constant. The stars are cold and bright. And the night, finally, is entirely your own. Rest. Breathe. Sleep.